My Archrival Got Me Pregnant Episode 6. Julian Grant froze in place for a second, his steps halting. A subtle emotion flickered through his eyes before he quickly swapped it for a look of distaste. Saying that kind of cheesy stuff to another guy, don't you feel embarrassed? Don't be so bound by gender roles. Lucas Shaw handed him a reheated dish. That luxurious multi-course dinner, after all the chaos, ended up being eaten like cheap takeout. News soon came from the ICU. Qin Wang's condition had stabilized. After the whirlwind of fear and relief, her family seemed emotionally drained and had quieted down. Rumor had it they were still grumbling, but at least they weren't threatening to lay funeral wreaths in Lucas's office anymore. Julian sent a WeChat message to Tang Ke. Ignoring the barrage of question marks that followed, he returned home. The moment Lucas changed into slippers, Julian kicked him toward the bathroom. Lucas had sweated buckets rescuing Qin Wang. It was like he'd been pulled out of a swimming pool. Going from hot to cold so fast, Julian worried he'd catch a chill. He originally suggested Lucas shower at the hospital, but Lucas refused, insisting he wouldn't go unless Julian came home with him. "I was afraid you'd run off while I was in the shower," Lucas said. Julian had no idea where Lucas had picked up such childish antics. The rose bouquet and rabbit costume had also come home with them. Lucas tossed them carelessly onto the coffee table. Julian, disliking the clutter, picked up the rabbit headpiece in one arm and the roses in the other. After a moment's thought, he walked toward the bedroom. He placed the rabbit head neatly on the windowsill. From there, the giant rabbit could watch the smaller bunny on the bed. The two faced each other across the room, giving it a strangely cozy charm. Julian figured Lucas wouldn't be scared of a costume he'd worn himself. After giving the bunny's head a pat, he left it in the bedroom. As for the roses, Julian looked down at the blooming bouquet. Most of the deep red petals were vibrant and lush, though the outer edges showed signs of wear, slightly dried, slightly yellowed. He washed out an empty vase from the study, removed the wrapping, and arranged the flowers. The fragrance filled the air, soothing and refreshing. Thinking it might help with fatigue, he placed the bouquet on the desk. Since Lucas had moved in, Julian's study had been split in two. The once single-user hardwood desk now had 2 computers, an extra chair, and new bookends. Lucas sat across from him. Julian placed the vase between the 2 computers. He stepped back, evaluating the layout. The bouquet seemed a little too close to the right side, easy to knock over. He leaned forward to adjust it. That's when his hand accidentally brushed one of Lucas's document folders. He glanced down and saw that during his absence, Lucas's files had become a scattered mess. Julian didn't care much about bedroom cleanliness, but his workspaces were always immaculate, whether at the hospital or at home. His documents were neatly organized, an efficient workspace made for efficient thinking. He had reminded Lucas of this when he first moved in, and while Julian was around, Lucas had kept everything tidy, but now it was chaos. Julian sighed and began stacking the folders into a neat pile. Most were labeled with numbers or case abbreviations, but one thick file caught his attention. It bore no patient ID or medical shorthand, just 2 letters, JX. He paused. He often abbreviated his own name that way. Curious, he opened the folder, resolving to close it if it wasn't related to. The top page was a printed email addressed to Dear Prof. Shen. He kept reading. "Hello. Regarding the male pregnancy case you inquired about." Julian pulled out all the contents. The sender's name was familiar, one of the surgeons involved in a failed male pregnancy case Julian had previously researched. The next page was another email. He flipped through them, each from a different doctor, all contributors or participants in male pregnancy cases, most of which had ended in failure. Some attached anonymized pathology reports. Others shared insights. Few weren't even listed as authors in the published papers. They had only assisted in surgery. Lucas had emailed them all. The cases spanned multiple countries and institutions. Gathering this information must have been a logistical nightmare, and ultimately, most of it wasn't particularly useful compared to the single successful case. And yet, Lucas had still done it. Julian checked the timestamps. Most of the emails were sent within days. After he had revealed his condition, beneath the emails were copies of Julian's prenatal reports annotated in the margins. At the bottom of the stack lay Ken's article, heavily marked with handwritten notes. Underneath that, Lucas's own case, analysis and video log of Ken's surgery. It was far more detailed than what he presented at the meeting, down to the minute and second. Julian thought, there probably isn't a more meticulous patient case file in the world than this one. He returned the documents to the folder, his gaze drifting blankly across the room until it landed on the bouquet of roses. He suddenly thought, maybe that overpriced relationship coach Lucas hired did know something. Yes, yellow roses traditionally meant apology. But these bright, brilliant, red ones, resting vivid and earnest in his view, felt like a heart cut open in front of him, so raw, so honest. It moved him. By the time Julian came out of the shower, Lucas was already asleep on the floor. He must have been utterly drained. He'd collapsed into slumber the moment his head hit the pillow. Julian glanced at the bed. It looked untouched, exactly how he'd left it. When he had been around, Lucas used to make excuses to crawl into his bed, constantly complaining that the floor mattress gave him body aches. Now that he was gone, Lucas hadn't even touched the bed. Julian looked down at him. His breathing was steady, hair still wet and clinging to his forehead. One arm was raised over his eyes, like shielding from the light. Julian wondered, if it was too bright, why didn't he just turn off the light? Or use the sleep mode? Or a flashlight? Back in college, none of his roommates had been as ridiculously considerate as Lucas. Always knocking before entering, always asking before washing laundry, never turning off lights unless Julian said he was going to sleep. Even when on video calls, Lucas would step onto the balcony. Julian had zero self-awareness, never stopping to think, I'm the one who made all those rules. Instead, without a hint of guilt, he muttered to himself, you really don't have to be this polite. Lucas stirred at the sound of Julian's voice, blinking awake briefly. Seeing nothing urgent, he mumbled something incomprehensible and drifted back to sleep. Julian turned off the lights without a word. That night, Julian didn't sleep well. First came inexplicable insomnia. Then, just as he finally drifted off, cramps. His leg seized up sharply, jerking him awake with a pained grunt. He clutched it instinctively, trying to breathe through the agony. The muscle refused to relax. Maybe it was because Lucas hadn't been there to make him take calcium supplements. At times like this, he would usually toss the bunny onto Lucas. Lucas would wake and help massage his leg. Tonight, he hesitated, but Lucas woke anyway. Half asleep, he crawled over, eyes still closed, hands reaching under the blanket to find Julian's leg. He pressed down expertly, easing the muscle. You should have called me, he muttered. How did you know? Lucas kept pressing. Your breathing changed. Julian froze. I want to tell you something, Julian said, sitting up. Lucas murmured, He sounded groggy, his tone unusually soft. Julian reached out, gently covering Lucas's eyes, and turned on the bedside light. Lucas squinted in the light, blinking a few times. Okay, I'm good. Julian removed his hand and met his eyes. I want to keep the baby, Julian said. Lucas blinked. You want to keep her? He jolted upright, suddenly wide awake. Are you serious? He asked, his voice tight with disbelief. Julian nodded. But why? Lucas asked. The surgery's possible now. You don't have to risk carrying her to term. Is it because you don't trust my surgical skills? If that's it, we can go to the US together. I'll pay. The visa's approved. I'll talk to the broker and lower the apartment price if I have to. Julian shot him a look and turned away. There's no definitive evidence that carrying to term is more dangerous. Lucas's brain stalled. You mean... Julian cut him off. Or is it that you don't want her? Lucas fell silent for a long moment. Then he looked up. You're the one who's pregnant. The decision should be yours. The situation is different now. We're not cornered like before. Whatever you want, I'll support it. If you don't want her, then we won't have her. Julian stared at him. Then, slowly, he reached for Lucas's hand and pressed it to his belly. Their eyes met. Then, listen carefully, Lucas, Julian said softly. I want her. Lucas's pupils dilated. His hand trembled. And then, he felt it. A tiny flutter beneath his palm. A soft push. Even though it was faint, it was unmistakable. He looked up, stunned, and saw Julian's eyes widen too. Caught in the same moment of wonder, she had kicked, like a tiny fish blowing bubbles or a butterfly breaking free of its cocoon. For the first time, their daughter made herself known. You think she understands what we're saying? Julian asked. In that moment, on the night her parents decided to welcome her into the world, at 4 months old, their little one kicked for the first time. Thrilled, delighted, she danced in the womb, lighting up the hearts of the 2 men who would love her forever. And in the quiet after, Julian reached out and gave Lucas a brief, but very real, hug. Half a month later, someone, unclear who, had forgotten that both of them had the morning off today. No one remembered to pull the blackout curtains, and Julian Grant's east-facing bedroom was flooded with blinding sunlight early in the morning. He lay there for a while, annoyed, trying to go back to sleep. But after several failed attempts, he gave up and sat up in frustration, intending to get dressed, only to realize that his shirt buttons had begun to feel noticeably tight. With a scowl, he grabbed the pink stuffed bunny and hurled it with precise aim toward the man still sleeping on the floor. The plush toy flew through the air in a perfect arc and smacked Lucas Shaw square on the head. Lucas woke with a jolt, rubbing his eyes. Still half asleep, he pulled the bunny into his arms and blinked at Julian, who was sitting at the edge of the bed with his back turned. From that angle, his broad shoulders and slim waist were visible, but the curve of his belly wasn't. You still look skinny, Lucas mumbled, half awake. Julian turned around with a deadpan expression. The 5-month belly bulge was impossible to miss. Lucas squinted. Huh. After a beat, he muttered. Still better looking than my dad's beer belly. Lucas Shaw. Sensing danger, Lucas quickly sat up and tried to appease him. It's our day off. Want me to take you shopping for clothes? Julian reluctantly changed into a looser casual shirt, and the two of them headed to the mall. As they browsed, Julian's gaze lingered around the businesswear section until Lucas suddenly dragged him into a trendy streetwear shop. Lucas moved fast, grabbing a bunch of colorful hoodies from the racks and stuffing them into Julian's arms. Clearly, the fashion sense of a teenager lived on in him. Julian stared at the pile in his arms with a look of pure despair. Lucas, I graduated high school a long time ago. He had gone straight into an 8-year MD-PhD program and had been working in a hospital since year 5. He'd given up youthful styles long ago. With his youthful face, dressing too casually would make patients doubt his credibility. He usually stuck to shirts, sweaters, and trench coats. Clean, mature, dependable. Hoodies are warm and loose, Lucas insisted. And once you put on your lab coat, who's gonna see what's underneath? He tossed the chosen hoodies into a basket and nudged Julian into a fitting room. Then, with a swift move, he reached behind and locked the door from outside, crossing his arms smugly. If you don't change, I'm not letting you out, Julian sighed. You're totally wasting your talents as a doctor. Ever thought about becoming a debt collector? Lucas grinned. Too lazy to chase anyone but you. Julian glanced down at the pile of clothes. Most of them were ridiculously bright. After digging for a while, he finally found one black hoodie, low profile enough to stomach. He turned around, took off his shirt, and tossed it out. It landed squarely in Lucas's hands. Then, he pulled the black hoodie over his head, only to realize something was off. The designer, for reasons known only to them, had cut a hole right at the chest. Whether for breathability or fashion, who could say? Before he could complain, Lucas suddenly reached over and turned him around by the shoulders. His eyes fell immediately on the patch of skin exposed beneath the opening. Against Julian's pale chest was a striking red beauty mark, clearly visible through the gap, like a flourish at the center of a painting. "Looks great," Lucas murmured, rubbing his nose. "I knew this one would suit you." Julian gave a sarcastic smile. "Warm and cozy, huh?" Click. The lock turned. Lucas, the fearless trespasser, was thrown out, and the hoodie with him. From inside the fitting room, Julian called through gritted teeth, "Not needed, thanks." Lucas laughed and waved the dress shirt in his hand. "Your shirt's still with me." "No need," Julian said through the door. Then, sighing, he looked down at the neon-hued pile of hoodies and resigned himself to fate, pulling the topmost bright orange one over his head. Outside, hearing the rustle of fabric, Lucas smirked. A moment later, Julian emerged with a slightly awkward expression. He couldn't remember the last time he'd worn something this bright. Probably not since his high school uniform at number 6 middle school. Still, better than that ridiculous chest-bearing hoodie. He stood in front of the mirror. The sales assistant immediately gushed, "Oh wow, it looks amazing on you. You look just like a college student." Lucas's eyes lit up. Staring at Julian's reflection in the mirror, he said, "See? Told you I have great taste." The hoodie's color didn't make Julian look pale at all. On the contrary, it brought a youthful glow to his fair skin. Its loose fit perfectly concealed the slight curve of his belly. Still, Julian didn't seem too pleased. He was about to head back in to change when Lucas suddenly said, "The first time I saw you, you looked just like this." Julian paused. Lucas continued, wearing number 6's uniform. That bright red really stood out in the crowd. He chuckled softly. "Your clothes were warm-colored, but your face was ice-cold. I remember thinking, if only he went to my school. Blue would look better on him. But now..." Lucas rested his fingers against his chin, tapping thoughtfully. "Bright colors suit you better. Makes you look less untouchable." The sales assistant blinked, surprised. She'd seen people compliment friends' outfits before, but never like this. And then she watched Julian, after all that resistance, actually agree to buy the hoodie. She was still puzzled while wrapping the clothes. She glanced up just in time to see the way Lucas looked at Julian. The man being looked at didn't notice a thing, but the one doing the looking had no idea just how tender his gaze had become. She suddenly felt like she had witnessed something remarkable. Still processing that, she heard Lucas tap the counter lightly. He handed her the black hoodie. "And this one too," he said in a lowered voice. "Quickly. Don't let him see." "Huh?" Lucas glanced at Julian, who was already at the store's entrance, looking impatient. He turned back to the sales assistant and added, "Please, be quick." After browsing the mall for a while, they walked out with bags full of oversized sweaters and hoodies, enough to last Julian until month 6 at least. Then Lucas got a call. After hanging up, he turned to Julian. "Come on, I'm taking you to meet the maternity nanny." "Maternity nanny?" "Yeah," Lucas said. "I'll take care of you, of course, but a nanny's more professional with the baby. I did some research. Turns out you can hire them for a year or more now. If we find someone good, we'll sign longer. That way we'll have help once we go back to work." Julian was a little surprised. He had been thinking about hiring help too, but he hadn't expected Lucas to already be so far ahead. "You don't know how competitive it is in a city right now," Lucas said. "There's gold tier, silver tier, even diamond tier nannies. You have to book them half a year in advance, just like registering at the hospital. If you wait, they'll be fully booked. Harder to hire than a celebrity. And it's mutual interviews now, like picking a PhD advisor. I've already visited a few agencies and found one I like. She's free today, and so are we." They scheduled us for a meeting. Julian hesitated. "But our situation, you want to tell the truth?" Lucas asked. Seeing Julian go quiet, he added, "If not, we'll just say I'm the father. No need to explain who's giving birth." The agency already screens out gossipers, I made sure. Today's nanny seems discreet. Julian relaxed a bit. When they arrived at the agency, the nanny was already waiting. A staffer led the three of them to a meeting room and brought them tea. Mr. Grant, Mr. Shaw, the nanny greeted them with a gentle smile. She looked to be in her late 30s or early 40s. My name is Bao Nian. I've been a maternity nanny in a city for 8 years. She handed over a thick folder. Resume, medical check, certifications, past client reviews. Everything neatly categorized, professionally presented. Julian almost felt like he was reviewing a grad school application, but he was the one being interviewed too. Ms. Bao smiled politely. May I ask about your relationship? She added quickly. I don't mean to pry, it's just helpful for me to understand the family dynamic. And I assure you, I'll keep everything confidential. Julian and Lucas exchanged a glance. Colleagues, Julian said. Friends, Lucas said at the same time. Then, realizing the conflict, they both paused, then spoke again. Friends. Colleagues. They froze, turned to each other, and switched. Friends, Julian said. Colleagues, Lucas said. Bao Nian blinked at them, then smiled knowingly. Got it. I understand. She didn't press further. Do you two have any questions for me? Julian Grant and Lucas Shaw were both highly efficient, and Ms. Bao Nian wasn't one for unnecessary chatter. The interview wrapped up in just under 30 minutes, with all parties satisfied. A preliminary contract was signed. Bao Nian didn't work on site at the agency, so after the contract signing, the three of them exited together. She gave a polite nod and said, Then, I'll see you again in 6 months. Lucas turned to Julian, then offered, Would you like a ride home, Ms. Bao? We can drop you off. No need, she said, pointing toward a man walking toward them. My husband is here to pick me up. Lucas nodded, and he and Julian turned to leave. They had just taken a step when someone tapped Lucas on the shoulder. He turned and was instantly stunned. It was Bao Nian's husband, the owner of the rice pudding shop. Oh crap. Seriously? Of all the people to run into. Lucas's mind screamed silently. He briefly considered pretending he didn't see the man, but it was already too late. Knew it was you. The man recognized him right away and grabbed his arm with surprising enthusiasm. What are the odds? Fancy meeting you here. He laughed, just as loud and animated as ever. You have no idea. My kid got really sick not long ago, and that parking pass you gave us saved us a ton of money. He turned to his wife. Babe, this is the guy who gave me that parking card I told you about. What a small world, Bao Nian smiled. Thank you, Mr. Shaw. Lucas forced a dry laugh and nodded awkwardly. The man seemed about to ask about Lucas's so-called deceased wife, but then remembered how serious Lucas had been that night. Figuring she had probably passed away, he held back and didn't mention it. Instead, he turned to his wife and asked, How'd you know his last name? Bao Nian, unaware of the elaborate story Lucas had made up, replied, Naturally, Mr. Shaw and I just signed a year-long maternity nanny contract. He's our new employer. Maternity nanny? The man froze. He looked at Lucas in disbelief, and his expression shifted from friendly to ice cold. You're seriously something else, he spat. Your wife just died, and now you're already with someone else? You even have a baby on the way? Actually thought you were a decent guy. Julian, when did you get a wife? He asked sharply. Lucas could barely get the words out. Let me explain. You're his friend, right? The man rounded on Julian. Great. Then you tell me. Is this how your buddy acts? His voice rose, indignant and righteous. Just over a month ago, he came into my shop begging for pudding. I'd already closed, but he said his wife was dying and just wanted one last bite. I thought he was a loving husband, and now, what? She's barely cold in the grave, and he's already hiring a nanny? The man jabbed a finger at Lucas. Honestly, I'm starting to think he might have driven her to her death. A month ago, Julian's brain kicked into high gear. It took less than a second to connect. The dots. That pudding had been for him. So he was the doomed wife. Julian turned his head and glared at Lucas. His expression was sharp, enough to kill. Lucas gave a sheepish smile, beads of sweat forming at his temple. Julian took a deep breath and stepped in. "You've got it wrong. She's not dead." "What?" The man blinked. "Then the one who's pregnant is also your wife?" Julian hesitated. Lucas was desperately signaling with his eyes. One lie led to another, and Julian knew Lucas had only said all that to get him pudding. Still, it had landed him with this scumbag reputation. Julian sighed, shoulders slumping in defeat. "Yes," he said, voice low, unwillingly stepping into the lie. "She's his wife." Lucas's eyes trembled. The man froze, then broke into a grin. Wow, what a miracle. To come back from the brink like that. He clapped Lucas on the arm. "You two are blessed. I judged you wrong." "Man, my bad. Don't take it personally." Lucas didn't respond right away. Julian's words, "she's his wife," echoed in his mind, striking a strange nerve. He knew Julian was just helping him out of an awkward situation, but still, something about it stirred him, like a feather brushing his heart. Itchy, light, hard to describe. "Yes," Julian added, coolly. "Thanks to Dr. Shaw from OBGYN. His hands work miracles." He emphasized Dr. Shaw in a deliberately sarcastic tone, but Lucas, hearing it, felt his ears go hot. All right, said Bao Nian, clearly more tactful than her husband. She could tell this was a delicate situation, and now that Lucas was technically her employer, she saw no benefit in making things awkward. In her line of work, she had learned long ago, the more complicated the client's situation, the less you ask. Less gossip, more service was the golden rule in domestic care. She was here to earn a living, not pry into their lives. "Our kid's probably hungry by now," she told her husband. "Let's head." "Right," he said, slapping his forehead. "We'll be off, then." Turning back to Lucas and Julian, he said, "Bring your wife to the shop sometime. All the pudding you want on the house." As the couple walked away, Julian finally exploded. "You come up with lies like this and you're not a professional storyteller? 1 minute it's storyteller, the next it's debt collector. Make up your mind. What career do you want me to pursue?" Lucas retorted. Julian rolled his eyes. Once the man was gone, Lucas finally let out a long sigh of relief. "Don't worry," he said. "Even if I were just a doctor, I could still support you and the baby. We might not live lavishly, but we wouldn't starve." He added seriously, "I still think being a doctor pays better than storytelling or debt collecting. Who said you had to support me?" "No one," Lucas replied. "I want to." He looked Julian in the eyes. "So, will you let me?" Julian was quiet for a moment. Then he scoffed. "Go support your dying wife." "Okay." Lucas slung an arm around his shoulder. "Tonight, let's go get pudding, red bean flavor. But don't overeat this time, or your stomach will cramp again." As he spoke, his hand slid toward the back of Julian's neck. His fingers brushed lightly against the skin and accidentally grazed a patch of warmth. Julian jerked away and elbowed him hard. Lucas yelped in pain and looked up, only to notice Julian's neck had turned red. "What's that?" Julian's skin was pale, and the redness stood out starkly. Lucas reached out instinctively, but Julian slapped his hand away. He quickened his pace. Lucas chased after him, confused. "Are you having an allergic reaction?" Before the warmth could creep from his neck to his face, Julian clamped a hand over Lucas's mouth. Just as Lucas was about to yell murder, in dramatic protest, Julian's phone rang. It was his mother. He held a finger to his lips and whispered, "Shh," then answered, "Hey Mom, what's up?" On the other end, the clack of mahjong tiles could be heard. "Nothing, just playing cards with Aunt Yan." his mother said. She saw something on the news. Apparently there's a man overseas who had a baby? I didn't believe it, but she made me call you. You work in a big city, hospital, you'd know. Is it true? Julian looked over at Lucas. It's true. He explained the basic details of the case in the US, carefully avoiding anything personal. His mom gasped. So it's real? That's incredible. I told you it was true. Aunt Yan's voice chimed in, mixed with the click of tiles. You didn't believe me and had to call Shaoxu. Yeah. His mom laughed. He's always so busy. Well, your son's made it. Young and already a department head in the big city, Aunt Yan said. You raised him right. Julian's mom chuckled modestly. Oh, he did it on his own. I didn't raise him much. Julian. If there's nothing else, I'll hang up now. Okay. Go get back to work. Click. Julian sighed. His parents had always cared for him, genuinely, but they were also the kind to boast to others, using their son's success as social currency. He wasn't proud of being their bragging point. Lucas suddenly asked, have you ever thought about using this as a chance to tell them the truth? Julian paused. It was a good opportunity. With that public case in the US, maybe parents would be more open to the idea of male pregnancy. And Julian had always wanted to tell them. There were risks. He didn't know if he would survive the surgery. Didn't want them to face the shock of losing him without warning. And if he did survive, if the baby was born healthy, he'd eventually have to introduce her to her grandparents. But still, he was afraid. The online discourse around the US case had been intense. Though most comments were respectful, some were cruel. Freak, disgusting, unnatural. Julian feared what his parents would say. He could ignore strangers, but if they said those things, Lucas nudged his arm. Say the word, and I'll go with you. We'll take time off, go back to B City together, and talk to them in person. You're not scared? Julian asked. I'll stop by orthopedics first, Lucas said. Might need a head CT. Julian gave him a look. Isn't that insurance fraud? Lucas thought for a moment. Then I'll just order a custom Kevlar vest. Julian couldn't help it. He laughed. The tightness in his chest eased. He looked at Lucas and gave a quiet, order one for me too. Yo, Dr. Grant? Heading back to high school? Yu Sang asked the moment he saw Julian walk in. He had just taken off his coat, revealing a bright orange hoodie. Underneath, not really your style. Julian glanced toward Lucas, who turned around and asked Yu Sang with a grin, looks good? Yu Sang answered instinctively, looks great, then realized it was Lucas, asking. His face twisted like he'd seen a ghost, eyes darting back to Julian. For explanation, Dr. Grant. Someone called from the doorway. It was Xiaolei, waving him down. Julian gave her a nod and slipped out of the office before Yu Sang could dig for more context, leaving him alone to mutter, must be hearing things. What's up? Julian asked Xiaolei. She handed him a stack of patient files, transferred from a lower tier. Hospital this morning. Suspected primary unilateral ovarian cancer. Any sign of metastasis? Julian flipped through the ultrasound sheet. They checked for it at the previous hospital. Nothing so far. Xiaolei hesitated. Should we do another screening? Julian didn't answer immediately. He skimmed the case history then, frowned slightly. She's only 17. Too young. He held the CT film up to the light. After a moment, he returned it to the folder and flipped through the rest of the results. This all she brought? Yes, Xiaolei said. But from what I can tell, she's done most of the standard tests. Ultrasound shows a cystic mass, CT with enhanced echo. It does resemble a malignancy. Julian handed her the ultrasound. Doesn't the outline look too sharp to you? And the cyst walls got rich blood flow. Huh? Ask if she's had any gastrointestinal symptoms. Order an urgent gastroscopy and colonoscopy. Redo the ultrasound, but have them focus on the other ovary. Shaola hesitated. You think it's a misdiagnosis? Julian didn't answer right away. He glanced at her, then handed back the file, just ruling things out. I hope I'm wrong. Is she here? I'll take a look. She is. Shaola gathered the documents to lead the way. They had just turned the corner when a familiar voice called out, Julian! Julian looked up. It was Yanhua, wearing a pale gray trench coat. Beside her stood a girl with bright green hair, tattoo sleeves, and a sleeveless streetwear top. Despite the cold, quite a character. Yanhua dragged the girl forward. Seeing Shaola beside Julian, she paused. You're busy? Going to see a patient, Julian said. What's up? She's from the association. Yanhua gestured to the girl. Is Lucas in today? If you're busy, I can talk to him instead. The Women's Protection Association they both worked with often brought patients in for help, especially to OBGYN. But Yanhua had never brought someone this flamboyant. He was just here. Julian noticed the goosebumps on the girl's bare arms. Take her to the office. It's cold out. If you can't find him, I'll be back soon. Yanhua nodded. As Julian and Shaola walked off, she turned to the girl and patted her shoulder. Come on. The girl didn't move. Yanhua sighed, took her hand, and only then did the girl follow. Really? You're 17. Still need hand-holding? The green-haired girl turned her face away, refusing to answer. When they knocked at the office, Lucas happened to be getting coffee. He looked up. Yanhua? Nice coat. Then his gaze landed on the girl. Your sister? Thanks. Yanhua chuckled, introducing him. This is Dr. Shaw. Also with the association. The girl flicked her eyes up and gave him half a glance, her exaggerated eyeliner sharp and bold. Lucas eyed the tattoo of Peppa Pig on her arm. That's unique. How much? Was the sticker? Who said it's a sticker? She scoffed. It's a real tattoo. Lucas blinked, then glanced between her neon vest and Yanhua's elegant coat. Aren't you cold? I told her to wear more. She refused. Yanhua sighed, clearly frustrated. Anyway, enough of that. She explained. This is Ren Han. She contacted the association herself, said she has an ectopic pregnancy and no one to help. I'm not a doctor, but I know that can be fatal, so I brought her in. Most people the association helped weren't even aware it existed until they were desperate. Ren Han, clearly more internet savvy, had found them on her own. Oddly though, after meeting up, she refused to go to the hospital. She clung to Yanhua instead, eating with her, playing games, walking hand in hand. Yanhua finally snapped and threatened to walk away if she didn't come to the hospital. So here they were. Ectopic pregnancy? Lucas frowned. He glanced at the girl, who was dramatically blowing her bangs. She rolled her eyes. What are you staring at? All right, Lucas muttered. She looked too energetic to be sick. Ectopic pregnancy? He doubted she couldn't run a 1,500-meter race right now. You been checked? None of your business. She's a little sharp, Yanhua said gently. She's only 17. Don't take it personally. I don't think she's had any exams yet. We'll do a transvaginal ultrasound, Lucas said, already setting down his coffee. No need to go through outpatient. I'll take you to the ER. Wait. Ren Han grabbed Yanhua's sleeve and ducked behind her. Transvaginal? That sounds painful. They insert something, right? Yeah, but it's more accurate. Especially if you've been sexually active. I haven't, Ren Han burst out. Lucas raised an eyebrow. Then how'd you get pregnant? Ren Han glanced at Yanhua, then at Lucas. Finally, she bit her lip and muttered, Fine, I lied. I'll do it, okay? Lucas and Yanhua exchanged a look. Even Yanhua seemed to realize Something didn't add up. "Let's go," Lucas said. Yanhua tugged Ren Han along. "It's really not that bad. Trust him." When they reached the exam room, Ren Han lay on the bed like a martyr. The female technician caught Lucas's eye, understanding instantly. "Lift your shirt a bit," she told Ren Han gently. Feeling the cold gel on her belly, Ren Han flinched. Her tough exterior faded. With smudged eyeliner and trembling lips, she suddenly looked like a scared little girl. The technician moved the probe across her abdomen. Lucas stared at the screen. "You lied to me." Ren Han sat up, furious. "You said it was a transvaginal scan." Lucas didn't answer. He was frozen, eyes locked on the screen. "Lie down," he said quietly. "I'm done." Ren Han stood, fists clenched. "I'm not pregnant, all right? I lied. I just wanted someone to care." Lucas didn't move. After a beat, he said again, "Lie back down." His voice wasn't loud, but something about it made her stop. She did. Lucas pointed to a spot on the screen. "Check here again." The image steadied. There it was. No pregnancy sac, but something else. A fibroid. A large uterine fibroid. Benign, but big. And potentially dangerous. "Do you usually have heavy periods?" Lucas asked. "Long duration?" Ren Han panicked. "Wait, so I'm really sick?" "Just answer." She nodded. "We'll draw some blood," Lucas said. "If you're anemic, we'll recommend surgery." "Surgery?" she shrieked. "But I'm healthy. Doctor," she added suddenly, eyes wide. "Will I die? Is it that serious?" Yanhua was rattled. "Is it?" Back at OBGYN, Lucas handed her the ultrasound. "Get her blood work done." This time, Ren Han didn't resist. She even grabbed the form herself and dragged Yanhua toward the lab. As they left, Julian re-entered the office. "Did Yanhua come by?" "Yeah. She brought a girl who was faking it." Lucas shook his head. "Turns out she has a fibroid. Pretty big one, too." Julian nodded. "Simple operation." Lucas studied Julian's face. "What's wrong?" Julian shook his head. His mind was still on the 17-year-old patient he'd just seen. Her name was Ren Miao. Pale, soft-spoken, eyes like a doll's. Sweet, polite, like a fairy tale princess. But her fate was no fairy tale. She was 17 too. One girl faking illness. Another fighting for her life. That night, around 9 p.m., Julian sat at his desk. Lucas leaned over and snapped his fingers. "Time to go home?" Julian murmured, not moving. Lucas followed his gaze. Medical reports were spread out across the desk. New scans had revealed another mass on Ren Miao's opposite ovary, and one in her stomach. The lower-tier hospital had misdiagnosed her. This wasn't primary ovarian cancer. It was metastatic, specifically a Krukenberg tumor, stomach-originated cancer that had spread to the ovaries. Ovarian metastases were an entirely different beast. It meant her cancer was already stage 4, the worst prognosis. She was diagnosed too late, Lucas said. Julian's voice was low. "I wanted to try. You head home," he added, standing and gathering the files. Lucas grabbed his arm. "Surgery's on the 9th floor. You're really taking the stairs?" Julian glanced at him, but didn't ask how he knew. He didn't need to. Sometimes Lucas just understood him. He turned back and took the elevator. Lucas waited outside as he walked into the GI surgery office. "Dr. Ann," Julian greeted. Dr. Ann, his senior from GI surgery rotations, looked up, surprised. "Julian? What brings you here?" Julian didn't waste time. He handed over the scans. "I want to operate." He could handle the ovarian tumor, but the stomach tumor required GE expertise. He needed help. And read the file, then slowly pushed it back. "No, her primary tumor's manageable," Julian argued. "Surgery is possible, but it's metastasized to both ovaries," and said. And there's a sites. Even if I clear the primary site, can you clear the metastases? He sighed. You know the stats. If you can't reduce the tumors to under 1 centimeter, it's a ticking time bomb. And even if you do, it's a gamble. I spoke to the patient, Julian said, and her family. They want to try. Without surgery, she'd likely be gone in 3 months. Julian, Anne said gently, you're still too idealistic. Families change their tune real fast. Today, they're begging for hope. Tomorrow, they're sending funeral wreaths. He pointed to a plastic flower in the corner. See that? That was delivered this morning with a blood-stained letter. The doctor who sat at your desk took leave immediately and sighed. This kind of case gets rejected everywhere. It's no surprise. I had a successful case like this 2 years ago, Julian insisted. Outlier, Anne said. Statistically meaningless. She's high risk, and if Jihua turns her down, no one else will take her. Julian's voice was steady. She's 17. Her immune system is strong. If we're lucky, no such thing as luck. And snapped. If she were lucky, she wouldn't have cancer. Just handle the stomach tumor, Julian said. I'll take full responsibility. If her family causes trouble, they'll deal with me. And stared at him. What if I say no? I'll ask someone else. They'll all say no. Julian's eyes didn't waver. I have to try, and sat in silence. Julian didn't push, just waited. After a long pause and muttered, They told me you were stubborn. Guess they weren't kidding. He stood, picked through the pile of condolence flowers and shoved one into Julian's hand. I'll do it, he said. But if anything goes wrong, I'm not backing you up. Thank you, Dr. Anne. Think it over again, and said, pressing the flower into Julian's chest. This morning, one of those showed up here. Scared us all. Julian looked down at the cheap plastic bloom. That's a bit much. Take it, and said, or I'm backing out. Julian sighed and took the flower. As he turned to leave, Lucas snatched it from his pocket. You're still here? Julian asked, surprised. No way I'd leave you with him, Lucas said. He snapped the flower in half and tossed it. Julian frowned. That's not yours. No taking flowers from anyone else, Lucas said. If you like them, I'll order a yellow bouquet next time. Julian chuckled. He agreed. Of course he did. Lucas smirked. Who could say no to you? Nothing, Lucas said with a grin. Just thinking. Dr. Grant is handsome and compassionate. He threw an arm around Julian's shoulders. If only I could get some of that compassion. All of it goes to patients, Julian said seriously. So stay healthy. No hope of being your patient then. Lucas sighed. But you're my patient. Remember? He smiled. My most special patient. Julian turned away with a scoff, but smiled. Outside the window, stars sparkled in the night sky. When Julian looked at Lucas, it felt like those stars had fallen into his eyes. And he said softly, I picked my time off. Next week. Come home with me? Lucas Shaw returned to Jihua Hospital after finishing his lecture at a medical university. But instead of heading to his office, he detoured straight to the OR. Julian Grant. Still inside? He asked, glancing at his watch. It's been hours. Complicated case, another doctor replied with a shake of the head. That tumor wasn't easy to remove. Dr. Grant probably knew it too. He only scheduled one surgery today. Who knows how long it'll take? Did he eat? Probably not. He's handling the metastasis himself. Can't afford even a moment of distraction, or he might miss a margin. He hasn't left the table since it began. Lucas frowned. He changed into scrubs in the locker room, picked up a box of milk from the lounge, disinfected the surface, and slipped a straw into it. Then he entered the OR. Julian was focused. his hands steady as he operated on a Krukenberg tumor. The primary tumor had already been removed. Dr. Anne hadn't left yet, and gave Lucas a nod. Julian, however, didn't notice him at all. Lucas moved behind him and made eye contact with the scrub nurse. Avoiding her line of sight, he stepped slightly to the side, lifted Julian's mask just enough, and slipped the straw toward his lips. Surgeons lose strength quickly during long operations. It's common for assistants or nurses to feed them fluids this way. Julian instinctively opened his mouth and took the straw without pausing his work. Lucas watched his throat move as he drank. Once the box was empty, Lucas pulled it back and gently adjusted Julian's mask. The nurse beside them looked like she wanted to say something. Lucas made a quiet gesture and walked off silently with the empty milk box. The nurse stood frozen. She hadn't looked too closely earlier, assumed it was just a staff nurse, providing routine support. But now, as Lucas walked away, the realization hit her. That was Dr. Shaw. Wait, weren't Dr. Shaw and Dr. Grant supposed to be rivals? She glanced at Julian. He remained laser-focused on the surgery, completely unaware of who had just been by his side. "Wipe," Julian suddenly called. "Oh, right." The nurse snapped back to attention and dabbed his forehead. As she worked, she mentally rationalized what she'd seen. Maybe the duty nurse got held up, and Dr. Shaw was just helping out, temporarily. He is a helpful guy, after all. And anyway, he didn't even look at Julian, probably didn't realize it was him he was helping. Reassured by her own logic, the nurse gave Julian a respectful nod and returned to her post. Over 2 hours later, Julian finally emerged from the OR, exhaustion written all over his face. Seeing Lucas, the tension in his features loosened slightly. "How'd it go?" Lucas asked. "Pretty well," Julian replied. "I think there's hope." Lucas stepped forward, placing both hands on Julian's shoulders and kneading firmly. "Keep that kind of talk between us. Don't say it to the patient." The massage helped loosen Julian's sore muscles. He leaned slightly into the touch, relaxing. Then, when Lucas shifted his hands toward Julian's neck, Julian raised a hand to block him. "Don't touch my neck," he said, giving Lucas a sidelong look. Lucas raised a brow. "Afraid I'll hit your carotid sinus by accident?" He smirked. "Or are you ticklish?" Julian said nothing. Lucas leaned forward and blew a puff of air at the back of his neck. Julian shot up like he'd been electrocuted, eyes sharp. Lucas instantly raised his hands over his head. Okay. I'm sorry." Then, under Julian's glare, he bit back the second half of his sentence. "Next time, I'll aim higher." Ren Miao's post-op recovery progressed quickly. Chemotherapy planning was underway. Before taking time off, Julian made a trip to her ward to check on her. Unexpectedly, he ran into Lucas at the door. It was a 3-person room. The bed by the door was empty, but the curtain between it and the middle bed was drawn. Ren Miao was in the innermost bed. Julian assumed she was resting and was about to speak, when Lucas suddenly pulled him into an embrace, covering Julian's mouth and gesturing for silence. Julian froze. Just as he was about to shove Lucas off, he heard voices from beyond the curtain. 2 girls chatting. Soft laughter. Quiet, intimate tones. "I just found out your name's Ren Miao." "That's wild," said a bubbly voice. "I'm Ren Han. It's like we're sisters." "So funny," came the gentler reply. "We're the same age too, I think." "What are you in for?" Ren Han continued. "I got diagnosed with this uterine fibroid thing. Never expected it. Thought I was dying at first. Turns out I just had anemia from heavy periods. Freaked me out." Julian recognized that voice. Bright, defiant. Ren Han, the green-haired girl Lucas had seen earlier. "You had surgery already?" she asked. Ren Miao nodded. "Yes. But my illness is serious. My parents won't tell me what it is. They keep saying it's not a big deal." Ren Han hesitated. "That's suspicious. Ren Miao sighed. They've always been strict. No more than an hour on the computer. No romance novels. Piano practice every day. She paused. But after I got sick, they started asking what I wanted to do. Said they wouldn't stop me anymore. That's when I knew, maybe I don't have much time. What? Don't say that, Renhan blurted. You look totally fine. I hope so. Ren Miao gave a small smile. I envy you. You're so free. Your parents let you dye your hair, wear what you want. Renhan scoffed, suddenly deflated. Free? They're too busy making money to care. She told her story, how she skipped school, tanked her grades, tried everything to get their attention, but nothing worked. Even when she got a tattoo, they barely blinked. One night, scrolling the internet, she saw a post about the Women's Protection Association. She wasn't poor, she wasn't sick, but she was lonely. She lied about having an ectopic pregnancy just to get someone to care. That someone was Yanhua, and it worked. For a while. But Yanhua's busy, she said, helping people who really need it. Then I'll care about you, Ren Miao said suddenly. What? I might not be around long, Ren Miao whispered. But while I'm here, I'll care for you every day. Ren Han turned her face, hiding her emotions. You're not dying, Ren Miao smiled sadly. I once saw my mom's chat with my aunt. They mentioned chemo. On TV, only cancer patients get chemo. Ren Han froze. Wait, really? Sorry, she said, realizing the slip. No, it's okay. Ren Miao smiled. I'm happy I met you. Everyone else treats me like I'm fragile. Cancer doesn't mean death, Ren Han insisted. Death rate's high, sure, but that just means you have to be the lucky one. She tugged off her wig, revealing short hair underneath. See? I've got tons of these in different colors. When you lose your hair, I'll give you the prettiest one. She took Ren Miao's hand. We'll cosplay together. You'll be the cutest anime girl ever. I'll take your pictures. Just pick a character you like. My mom never let me read manga. Well, now you can, Ren Han grinned. Be my best friend. I'll do whatever you want. Really? Pinky, promise. The curtains swayed in the breeze. Two silhouettes leaned toward each other. Soft laughter echoed beyond the cloth. Julian stepped out of Lucas's arms, straightened his coat, and walked away. Lucas followed. Not checking on her? Later, Julian said quietly. Let them finish first. What about Renhan's surgery? Tomorrow, Lucas said. Afterward, we leave for B City. I swapped my clinic schedule. He handed Julian 2 high-speed train tickets. Back the next night? Julian nodded. One day was already more than he could afford. His work was a never-ending loop. On the train, Lucas reached over and closed Julian's tablet. Sleep. It's early. I don't want you getting insomnia. Julian sighed, then closed his eyes. Sleep didn't come easily. Nerves, anticipation, just as he started to drift off. A baby wailed. Loud, piercing. Julian winced, head aching. He tried to tune it out, but the cries only grew louder. Nearby, a woman jiggled her baby, apologizing profusely. He just won't stop crying. I'm so sorry. A grumpy passenger muttered. Can't you calm him down? I'm trying. The woman's eyes reddened. The baby cried harder. May I? Lucas stood and approached. I'm an OB-GYN. She looked hesitant. Are you sure? The grumpy aunt snapped. Let him try. Not like he's kidnapping the kid. Lucas carefully cradled the baby. One hand under the head, one supporting the body. The baby clung to him, still sobbing. Lucas hummed softly, gently rocking. After a few minutes, he moved to the space between cars. The motion of the train and the view from the window calmed the child. His cries faded. His breath evened out. When the baby finally slept, Lucas handed him back. "Thank you," the mother whispered. Lucas returned to his seat. "Still can't sleep?" Julian opened one eye. "The baby's out?" "Out like a light," Lucas smiled. "I've got skills, huh?" "You've done this before?" "My nephew. I thought you were an only child." "You never ask about me," Lucas teased. "Want me to rock you next?" Julian rolled his eyes. "Scared?" Lucas smirked. Julian saw through the bait. "Try harder." Lucas grinned. Still worked. Julian ignored him, tried to sleep again. Half an hour later, still wide awake, Lucas nudged him. "Wanna try?" Julian hesitated, then sighed. "Fine." He leaned against Lucas's chest. Lucas froze. His arms hovered, unsure what to do. "Your heart beats loud," Julian mumbled. Lucas swallowed. "Move up a bit." Julian shifted, resting near Lucas's collarbone. His hair tickled Lucas's chin. Lucas swallowed again. "Your heart's racing," Julian murmured. "Get an EKG later." "Yeah, probably just warm," Lucas croaked. Julian drifted off. Lucas stayed frozen. He tried so hard to suppress everything, to be good, to respect boundaries. But now, with Julian sleeping in his arms, breathing softly, all that restraint unraveled. And Lucas realized maybe he needed a doctor too, not for his heart, but for the part of him that only responded to Julian Grant. Julian Grant had no idea that Lucas Shaw's heart was spinning with so many hidden turns. Lucas had worn something light, his body temperature slightly high, but perfect for someone to lean against and sleep. Julian wasn't sure why, but Lucas's breathing sounded a bit heavier than usual. Strangely, though, it was soothing. That rhythmic sound made him drowsy. Within minutes, he was nodding off, half asleep. He caught a faint scent. Lucas had a soft pine fragrance on him, with a gentle sweetness in the bass notes, like the morning air after a night of intimacy. Relaxing, comforting, safe. Julian wondered, was this the same scent Lucas used to calm the baby earlier? Lucas liked wearing cologne, and he often lit incense or used diffusers at home, but his scents were always so subtle that Julian, with mild rhinitis, barely noticed them. Every time Lucas asked him to try and appreciate the aroma, Julian remained unmoved. Maybe it was because they were so close right now. But tonight, he could finally smell it. That soft, lingering scent wrapped around him. It smelled young, like bluebells blooming one after another on rain-kissed grass. The kind of bloom that swayed gently when brushed by a breeze. No. This wasn't the first time he had caught this scent. Julian, still drifting on the edge of sleep, vaguely remembered they had been this close once before. Back then, the scent had been stronger, bolder. The air between them had carried something messier, something thick with suggestion, and the unmistakable burn of alcohol. But before Julian could think it through, the memory slipped away. Sleep finally took him. Deep, heavy, dreamless. In that sleep, bluebells bloomed across a hillside, swaying in soft layers, and in the wind, they turned into the pale blue school uniform of a teenage boy. Faint and blurred, Julian thought to himself. That figure looked familiar. Julian Grant's parents met them at the train station. When they saw another man standing beside their son, they were clearly caught off guard. Lucas? Mrs. Grant still remembered him, that kid who once couldn't pay off a loan shark but had a likable smile. She greeted warmly. "Did you get that debt cleared up?" Then added, "Oh, are you just heading the same way as Julian?" "Thank you for your concern," Lucas replied politely, glossing over the first question. He had just started answering the second when Julian interrupted. "He's coming home with me." "Oh?" Mrs. Grant was obviously surprised, but she quickly recovered, saying, "No problem at all. We've got a spare room at home. Thank you for the trouble," Lucas said with a respectful smile, though he didn't explain why he was staying. Mr. and Mrs. Grant exchanged a glance. The ride home was cloaked in subtle, unspoken tension. Julian rarely visited home unless it was a major holiday. For him to suddenly announce he was coming back on short notice and with a guest in tow revived some old suspicions they thought they had put to rest. By the time they got home, it was already past 9 p.m. Julian and Lucas had eaten on the train. His parents had finished dinner earlier. After the usual greetings and small talk, Mrs. Grant looked at Julian with a trace of scrutiny, trying to read something from his face. Noticing her gaze, Julian cut straight to the point. "Dad, Mom, I came home to talk to you about something important." They sat on the long sofa in the middle of the living room. Julian and Lucas sat side by side on an older settee off to the side. "What is it?" Mrs. Grant asked, a bit uneasy from his serious tone. She picked up an apple and started peeling it. "You just got home. Haven't even had water yet. Want some fruit first?" "No thanks." Julian's voice was dry. He licked his lips. Beneath the cover of his jacket, Lucas quietly reached out and held Julian's hand. Julian didn't pull away. His palms were clammy, but his voice stayed calm. "You remember the news about that man in the US who got pregnant?" Mr. Grant fidgeted nervously. Mrs. Grant's expression tightened. They exchanged a glance before turning to him again. "What about it?" she asked, tentative. Julian took a breath, then said, "Experienced the same thing." What do you mean by that?" Her voice trembled. Julian looked down at his abdomen, then said under her wide-eyed stare, "Exactly what it sounds like." His parents sat stunned for a long moment, seemingly unable to process what they had just heard. Finally, Mrs. Grant stammered, "Are you serious, Julian? That was on the news. It was just some report. How could it happen to you?" When Julian didn't deny it, she involuntarily glanced at his belly. Then, as if burned, she quickly looked away and stood up. "You're a man, Julian. How could something like this even be possible?" "I don't believe it." She shook her head, stepping forward to grab him. But Lucas immediately stood, blocking her path and shielding Julian. "Ma'am," he began. That word seemed to snap her out of her shock. She finally registered. "Lucas again. You," she said slowly, then pointed at him. "So you're the reason he came home. He's also the father," Julian said. Mrs. Grant went pale. Clutching her chest, she searched her memory for any clue, then looked at Lucas again and asked with difficulty, "The loan shark?" Lucas lowered his head. "Made that part up. The dead wife? Also, made up a daughter?" "That part's true." She turned toward Julian, voice shaking. "In my house? In my son's belly?" Lucas nodded. She spun around and raised her hand to slap Julian. But before it landed, Lucas caught her wrist, shielding Julian behind him. "Uncle, Auntie, I understand you're upset. We can talk through this. But, please, don't hit him." "Talk?" Her emotions overwhelmed her. She found the perfect outlet. "Lucas, you got my son pregnant and you still have the nerve to talk? Get out of my sight." "It's my fault," Lucas said quickly. "If you have to hit someone, hit me. Just don't touch Julian. Quit pretending to be noble. You think I won't hit you because you're someone else's son?" All the goodwill Lucas had once earned was now useless. Her son was her bottom line, and she was ready to fight for him like a cornered lioness. "Fine, hit me," Lucas said. "As long as you don't hit Julian, I won't resist." Mrs. Grant grew even more furious. She shoved past Lucas and glared at Julian. "What is he to you, huh? Did he sweet-talk you into bed? If you're really my son, stop hiding and explain what's going on here." "We got drunk and something happened," Julian said, standing. "Nobody tricked me." "Then what are you two?" she shouted. "Colleagues?" she asked, sarcastically. Colleagues, Julian replied. She raised a feather duster and smacked Lucas across the back. He winced, but didn't dodge. Mom. Julian stepped forward and pulled Lucas aside. Mrs. Grant pointed the feather duster at Lucas's face. Why did you get close to my son? For money? For what? He moved in to take care of me. He doesn't want anything from me. It really was an accident, Julian said, his voice rising. Auntie. Lucas tried to speak. Shut up. She turned back to Julian, disappointment written all over her face. You were always my pride, Julian. How could you do something like this? I didn't mean to, Julian whispered. Can't the baby be taken care of? She asked. If it was an accident, no, Julian said firmly, cutting her off. Julian, she said, her voice now shrill with panic. Do you know what this means? This child will ruin your life. You'll never have a normal family. How do I explain this to anyone? That my son can have babies? Julian stared at her, face pale. For a second, he recalled that conversation he overheard between Ren Han and Ren Miao. That night, Lucas had randomly asked him if he'd ever rebelled as a teen. He hadn't. Top grades, good behavior. The worst thing he'd done was sneak out to play computer games, a rite of passage for most boys. But this choice to keep the baby despite every reason not to, maybe that was his delayed act of rebellion. It hadn't come from spite. It was a decision he'd made after deep thought, one he would stand by. He didn't regret it. Mom, he said quietly, I'll take responsibility for my own life. Mr. Grant, who had remained silent, finally spoke. Honey, sit down. Let him talk. What is there to talk about? She snapped. About how our son slept with a man? About how he's not even a man anymore? Julian's face paled. Lucas stepped in, shielding him again, gently squeezing his arm. Mrs. Grant raged. And now you're all over each other in front of me? Lucas didn't back down. He needs rest, Auntie. If you don't care about him, I do. Let's talk again when you're calm. He turned to Julian and whispered, Go shower, okay? Julian nodded weakly. As he turned, he stumbled. Lucas caught him, but Julian waved him off and made his way to the bathroom. Lucas followed, but Mr. Grant stopped him. You'll sleep in the farthest room tonight. I'm just going to draw him a bath. He can do that himself, Mr. Grant said. He doesn't need your help. Lucas took a deep breath. Julian waved him off, signaling him to obey. Lucas patted his shoulder. Be careful. The bathroom water began to run. The living room fell into an uneasy silence. Without Julian, no one seemed to know what to say. A while later, the water stopped. Julian walked out in a white t-shirt and pajama pants, towel draped over his shoulders. I'm going to bed, he said. Wait. His mother started, but he shut the door. Lucas sighed softly, eyes falling on the half-peeled apple still sitting on the table. After a long pause, he spoke. Uncle, Auntie, if you're ready to talk, I'd like to say something. Mrs. Grant bristled. Mr. Grant held her arm, his voice low. Let him speak. Lucas looked between them. Julian and I, we have homes, careers. We're financially independent. We could have kept this secret forever. Have you thought about why he chose to tell you? I'm his mother. Of course he should tell me. That's not how it works, Lucas said calmly. He's an adult now. If he didn't want you to know, not even a mind reader could figure it out. Mrs. Grant didn't respond. Lucas continued. You saw the news about the US case. But that wasn't the first time a man got pregnant. You know why only that one was reported? They were listening now, Lucas explained gently. Because the others didn't make it. Their surgeries failed. Mr. Grant's brow furrowed. You mean surgery is risky, Lucas said. Julian will need one too. Mrs. Grant stiffened. He needs surgery? Lucas nodded. The two of them paled. Earlier, they were overwhelmed by the shock. They hadn't yet stopped to consider the risk. Lucas looked at them. He's your pride. And I get it. Bragging about your kid is only human. Then he cut to the heart of it. You think this is shameful. You wanted a perfect daughter-in-law. Grandkids you could show off to relatives. You wanted to be envied. But Julian is your son first. If he's no longer your pride, will you stop loving him? He shook his head. I don't think so. Julian's grown up loved, even if you pressured him. He's strong because of that love. He's facing the biggest challenge of his life. Whether it's me or you, we should support him. Mrs. Grant looked shaken. After a long pause, she said, I just want him to marry, to have a family. You've never lived without children, Lucas said. You can't judge. But now, Julian has a child, and he wants this child. He lowered his gaze. We've already decided. I won't marry. We'll raise this child together. We'll grow old together, and we'll live well. Mrs. Grant stared at him, bewildered. You two, what even are you? Julian says we're co-workers, Lucas said with a smile. Let's go with that. But whatever we are, we're choosing to do this together. You don't need to worry. We'll take care of him. And the baby. He stood. And if you can, I hope you'll apologize. Some of your words tonight were really hurtful. He said no more. The rest, they would have to process themselves. Unnoticed, down the hall, Julian's bedroom door was slightly ajar. He had been there the whole time, silent, hand on the doorknob. Only after the conversation ended did he quietly close it again. Julian Grant quietly lay back in bed, propping a pillow behind him to sit, up slightly. From this angle, he could see the wall directly across from him, plastered with award certificates. His desk beneath was crowded with trophies, each inscribed with a different honor. He picked up his phone, thinking about sending Lucas Shaw a message. He typed out a few lines, then deleted them all. Staring at the screen in a daze, his mind replayed his mother's words. Over and over, he wanted to cover his ears, but the more he tried to silence the memory, the clearer it rang in his head. He didn't know how much time had passed when the quiet creak of the door broke the stillness. He looked up sharply. The person didn't come in, just nudged the door open a crack and asked, softly, "Can I come in?" It was Lucas's voice. Julian paused, his eyes still. After a beat, he replied, "You can." Only then did Lucas step inside. He closed the door behind him, his gaze following Julian's line of sight to the wall full of trophies. "I competed in that one too," he said with a hint of surprise, pointing at Julian's physics competition award. After making the finals, they had teams from number 4 and number 6 high do joint training. He added with a touch of regret, "But I came down with something and missed it. Otherwise, maybe I'd have met you earlier." Julian's expression flickered. He turned his head and said dryly, "Let's not. I deserve a peaceful high school experience." Lucas laughed. "Fair. Does it hurt?" Julian asked suddenly. Lucas hadn't expected the question. He quickly shook his head. Not wanting Julian to worry. Not at all. Then with a chuckle, he added, "But, Julian, you're the first person besides my parents who's ever hit me." Julian lowered his eyes. After a moment, he asked, "Why did you come in?" "I couldn't sleep knowing you were upset. I was worried you weren't feeling well." "You're not going to sleep?" Lucas pulled out the chair at the desk. "You rest. I'm not pregnant. I can handle a sleepless night. I'll sneak out before your parents get up. Worst case, I'll nap in the car tomorrow." Julian glanced at Lucas's sock-clad feet. Lucas caught the look and smiled. "Didn't wear shoes, didn't want your parents hearing." Julian nodded toward a pair of slippers. "Floor's cold. Wear mine." Lucas walked over and stepped into them, eyes crinkling with a smile. You're being sweet today. I'm not used to it. Julian shot him a look. After a beat, he glanced away and said, "If you want to get in bed." Before Julian could finish, Lucas had already darted back to the chair. "If I want to what?" "Julian, never mind." Julian turned off the light, pulled the blanket up to his chest, and buried himself in the covers, only his head visible. "If you're bored, look at your phone. The screen light might bother your sleep," Lucas said. "It's fine. I'm not bored." Julian gave a soft M&M and closed his eyes. Earlier, all he could think about was the shock and disappointment on his parents' faces, but now, for some reason, his attention had shifted entirely to Lucas. Maybe it was the quiet of the night, but he found himself wondering, was Lucas asleep? Eyes open? Was he resting or thinking? And if thinking, was it about something in his life? "Can't sleep?" Lucas asked suddenly. Julian jolted like a student caught spacing out in class. He hesitated, then murmured, "Missing your pink bunny?" Lucas teased. "You always sleep with it. Changing habits can mess with your rest." "How did you know I wasn't asleep?" "Been around you long enough," Lucas replied. "When you're out, you twitch. You've been frozen for 10 minutes. Julian pressed his lips together. That probably answered his earlier question. Lucas had been watching him. For some reason, that realization stirred something soft inside him. Maybe it was the late hour or the quiet around them. But he suddenly felt like talking. "That story I told you before about doing surgery on a plush toy? I made it up," Julian admitted. "Didn't think it would scare you." "Wow, Julian. When did you get so devious?" Lucas chuckled. Julian folded the corner of his pillow. "When I was little, my aunt gave me a pink bunny plush." Lucas shifted, attentive. "My mom's side has this old superstition. They think giving plush toys to boys makes them soft. So she hated it. After my aunt left, she tore it apart and threw it away. Even banned everyone from calling me by the nickname she gave me, Wrong. Said it sounded too delicate." Julian paused. "I forgot all about it. Until my aunt called me that again. I wasn't even into plush toys back then. But after seeing her destroy it, I started having nightmares. I dream of trying to sew the bunny back together. But I never could." He took a deep breath. "That's when I decided I wanted to become a doctor. I wanted to fix broken things. Later, when I started college, I bought another pink bunny. The nightmares stopped. Over time, I began to think plush toys were kind of cute. When I decorated my place, I bought a few more. Made the place feel a little more lived in." Lucas looked at him in the dark, voice low and warm. "If you'd told me all that, I wouldn't have had nightmares." Julian gave him a doubtful look. Lucas grinned. "Your parents were strict, weren't they?" Julian thought for a moment. "They had high expectations. Wanted me to follow the path they laid out. That's why it was so hard for them to accept that their perfect son wanted to have a baby." "I could tell," Lucas said. "You looked like you were carrying the world. When you told them, I kept wondering, was it just as hard when you told me? Was it painful too?" He laughed, then said softly, "It just got to me. I felt bad for you." Julian sat up and looked at him. "You didn't look like you felt bad." "You're right. I was a jerk. Wrong," Lucas said suddenly. Julian froze. Lucas continued, "When we live together, I want you to do whatever you want. Say whatever you want. Want whatever you want. No pressure." It was the same thing Ren Han once said to Ren Miao. Julian's heart warmed. To hide the emotion, he snapped, "Aren't you ashamed of stealing a teenage girl's line?" "She said it so well," Lucas said shamelessly. "A real quote should be shared. I'm spreading the wisdom." Julian rolled his eyes and turned away, the room falling into a peaceful silence. A while later, just as Lucas thought Julian had fallen asleep, a voice came. From the bed. "What about you?" Julian asked. "Your family never pressured you?" Lucas shook his head. "Nope. They gave up trying early. I was too wild, and they were too busy making money to care." "You were supposed to have your graduation banquet at Chengjia, right?" Julian asked. Chengjia was a well-known restaurant in B City. Julian remembered, hearing that another science valedictorian had booked the place right before him. His mother had even said they couldn't lose face. Same status, same venue, same standards. But when the date came, the other banquet was canceled. "Yeah," Lucas said, "but my parents had a business crisis. They rushed out of town, so we canceled." Julian looked surprised. Lucas had been the top scorer in B City. What kind of parents would miss that? "They didn't care about grades," Lucas said. "Couldn't care less about being valedictorian. I signed my own report cards. They believed that story. Valedictorian ends up working for a dropout. Thought entrepreneurship was the only way to go. And," Lucas added, "my older brother was a valedictorian too. A real one, solo. Made mine look unimpressive." Julian was hearing all this for the first time. He paused. "So, your family's got the smart gene?" "Maybe," Lucas said. "But my parents had no business sense. They wanted success but never found it. Spent their whole lives trying. Sometimes up, sometimes down, but never saved a penny." He smiled faintly. "That's why I became a doctor. Not because it's easy, but because it's stable. Even if it's exhausting, at least I'll have time for my kid." His voice was light, but something about it tugged at Julian's chest. "They're still in B City?" "Yeah," Lucas said, "running a dry cleaning shop. Not rich, but enough to get by." Julian hesitated. "You're not going to visit them this time?" Lucas shook his head. "Too short a trip. If I show up unannounced, they'll go nuts, buy a mountain of groceries. It's exhausting for them. I'll go back around New Year's if I can get time off." Julian tried to change the mood. "Your parents cook well?" Lucas's face shifted slightly. After a moment, he said, "It's okay. I've only eaten with them a few times in the past year." Realizing the tone had dipped, he quickly changed the subject. "Julian, doesn't this feel like a college dorm late-night chat?" He smiled. "My dorm was loud, especially after finals. Guys would talk until 2 or 3 a.m. Julian masked his emotions and played along. "Talk about what?" Lucas teased. "You guys didn't talk?" Julian gave him a look. "Of course we did. But I want to know what you talked about. Dreams, careers, city housing prices. Why we chose medicine. Girls we liked." Lucas trailed off, then added with a grin. "And the guy from the next dorm, Julian Grant." Julian made a low, scoffing sound. Lucas continued, "But I never told anyone about my family." "You're the first." Julian rubbed the blanket between his fingers. After a long pause, he asked, "Can I hear the rest?" Lucas was quiet for a while. Outside, rain began to fall. Neither of them tried to sleep. After a long time, Lucas finally said, "Okay, I'll tell you." Lucas Shaw lowered his gaze, pressing lightly on his knuckles. "You remember I once told you I have an older brother," he said. "When my parents left for a city to start their business, I was still a toddler, needed someone for everything. They thought I was a burden, so they only took my brother with them. I stayed with my grandparents. I barely saw them once or twice a year. Later, during my middle school years, my grandma passed, and not long after, my grandpa followed. They came back for the funeral. I thought they might stay, but they said my brother was still studying in a city and couldn't transfer. They asked if I wanted to move there too. Said the education was better. I didn't want to. I couldn't leave my friends, and I didn't want my grandparents' memorials to go untended. So they said they'd come back. Once my brother finished high school, Lucas smiled faintly. It made sense, I guess. Closer family always gets priority. Before leaving, they gave money to our relatives and neighbors. Told me to tag along for meals. Whoever was eating, I could eat with them. As long as I was polite, no one would turn me away. And school had dorms, so I managed. A few years later, my brother got into college. My parents came back. But after a year or two, they left again. I think they realized I was pretty good at taking care of myself. Plus, my brother got a girlfriend. They wanted to buy him a house, so they went back out to earn money. They only came back for good a couple years ago. He looked at the floor of Julian Grant's childhood bedroom. Maybe they're trying to make it up to me. Every time I visit, they cook up a huge feast. He chuckled. But maybe I've outgrown that hunger for attention. It doesn't taste as good anymore. Julian glanced at him, expression unreadable. Teenage years are delicate. To leave a kid to bounce between relatives, essentially surviving as a guest, it wasn't something Julian could imagine himself handling. Maybe that was what made Lucas smoother around people, better at reading the room. But that kind of skill came at a price. Julian couldn't help feeling a twinge of ache for him. 2/3 of the heart sits left of center, 1/3 to the right. Maybe. Hearts are naturally tilted. Few parents can love all their children equally. Lucas was born later. His brother had already reached the pinnacle. No matter how hard Lucas tried, he was always running after his brother's shadow. To others, being valedictorian was impressive. But in his home, it was merely an extension of his brother's legacy. Nothing new, just not a disappointment. Once a family has had one valedictorian, a second isn't remarkable. Julian. Lucas looked over. I've always wondered, what's it like to be your parents' pride? Julian met his gaze. Lucas bit his lip. When I was little, I used to wish I were the older brother. But now, it doesn't matter. He forced a smile. I wasn't close with my parents, but I was close with my grandparents. I bet my brother doesn't even know the tiger skin pepper story. He laughed, half joking. And my brother really is the better son. He went back to B City after college like they wanted, got married, had kids, gave them that happy, peaceful life they wanted. Not like me. I got them fined for a second child, cost them their jobs, and now I just float around, refusing to go back. Not that they care whether I come home or not. His parents didn't meddle in his life anymore. Maybe because they had neglected him too much when he was young. Now that he was grown, they no longer had the right to interfere. Their concern was polite and distant, a little too late. Lucas had always thought they probably regretted having him. If they could go back, they likely wouldn't have taken that risk. His family was complete, with just his brother. Lucas paused, then laughed softly. But I don't blame them. It's just life. The weight of life is a mountain every young person has to climb. Lucas used to wait in B City for his parents to return from a city. Now that he was grown, he headed to a city himself, the same city that once kept his family away. That city, a pulsing heart full of energy, drew in countless ambitious young people. They came, wave after wave, pouring their youth into its streets, keeping its lights burning. And then they aged. Worn out, used up, pushed aside. Some stayed. Most were swept away, until the next generation arrived to do it all again. Lucas figured, maybe that was just how it worked. His only regret? That despite having an extra family member, his road seemed lonelier than most. Ugh, Lucas sighed. Why am I rambling about this stuff? He rubbed his nose, half laughing. Feels like I'm being petty, bringing up old family drama. Julian, he said, just pretend you didn't hear any of that. It's embarrassing. Before he could finish, Julian said, then let me care for you. Lucas froze. Julian's voice was soft but clear in the quiet night. I never thought I'd live with someone who wasn't my partner, let alone for a lifetime. But after meeting you, I think I could. Julian looked at him and said, "From now on, let me be the one who cares. For you. Who stays." Lucas fell silent. "What's wrong?" In the dark, Julian couldn't see his face clearly. Lucas sat still, not speaking. Julian reached toward the lamp. "Don't." Lucas stopped him. "Don't turn it on." Julian's hand paused mid-air. From Lucas's voice, he heard something subtle, maybe a little hoarse. The room fell quiet again. Lucas turned his face slightly, trying to hide it. He didn't even mention that Julian's words were nearly the same ones Ren Miao had once said. At first, he thought Ren Han was just a rebellious teen, but after overhearing the two girls talking, something clicked. He realized he understood Ren Han far more than he expected. And maybe that's why Ren Miao's words had moved her so deeply. Lucas had even been a little jealous of Ren Han. He never imagined someone would say those words to him, let alone Julian. His mind swirled with thoughts, and deep down something warm and sour stirred in his chest. Overwhelmed, he asked something he'd long wanted to ask. "Why did you change your mind? Why did you decide to keep the baby? Was it because you felt soft?" Julian didn't answer. Lucas pressed on, or was it even just a little bit because of me? Still, Julian didn't speak. Lucas glanced at the time. Realizing he may have crossed a line, he leaned his head back and swallowed hard. He forced a smile and said, lightly, "Never mind. You don't have to answer. It's late. You should get—" "It was," Julian said. The wind rustled the curtains. Julian looked at him and suddenly said, "There was—" When Julian Grant woke up that morning, Lucas Shaw was already gone. He glanced at his phone and was surprised to see it was past 9. It had been ages since he'd slept this late. He checked the alarm he had set the night before, only to find it had been turned off. No wonder he hadn't heard anything. Must have been Lucas, who turned it off after he'd fallen asleep. He thought about getting up and confronting him for it, but the rare indulgence of sleeping in actually felt pretty nice. The bed was soft, the familiar scent of home lingering on the sheets. His pillow was so plush that his cheek sank right in. The house was unusually quiet, like no one else was home. Julian stayed in bed a little longer, something he almost never did. He nearly drifted off again before jolting upright and forcing himself awake. After a few minutes, he realized that from the moment he'd woken up, he hadn't heard a single sound from outside. Puzzled, he got up and walked to the door. The moment he pushed it open, boom, a burst of colorful streamers exploded above his head. Glitter and paper. Ribbons rained down on him. Dazed, Julian looked around for the culprit, only to see the dining table, covered in his favorite dishes. His parents sat at the table, eyes turned toward him. In the middle sat a cake. His mother looked nervous. His father glanced at him and said, "Wash up, then come eat." Lucas leaned his chin on one hand, grinning. "Morning, Julian." Still stunned, Julian washed up and joined them at the table where he sat down, still blinking. "What is all this? I made all your favorites because I... His mother fumbled. His father took over. "Your mom wanted to apologize. This was Shaw's idea," she added, pulling out a bouquet of yellow roses and handing them to Julian. "I've never given flowers to anyone in my life. These are my first, and I'm giving them to my son." Julian glanced at Lucas, who smiled proudly. "This time I came up with it myself. No online help from relationship experts." Julian ran a hand through his glitter-dusted hair. He'd spent half the morning washing it out. His gaze held a trace of warning. "Next time, maybe consult one." His mom looked at him nervously. "Do you like the flowers?" Julian lowered his head and smelled the yellow roses. Their scent was light and sweet, and the golden color reminded him of sunshine through an open window, warm and comforting, just like this morning. "Thanks, Mom." He didn't look up. His eyelashes cast shadows over his eyes veiling the heavy emotion there. "I didn't realize how much this meant to you," his mother said, her voice thick. She patted his arm. "Whether or not you get married, we can talk about that later. I just want you to be okay. That's what matters most." Julian pressed his lips together and gave a quiet maybe. Just maybe. Those impossible standards, the pride and expectations parents carry, could be set aside when their child was truly struggling. Whatever harsh rules had once seemed immovable didn't feel as important anymore when health was at stake. Life mattered most. That had been true for Ren Miao's parents, and now, for his. His mom looked at him, her voice soft. "Since this happened, we'll face it head on." She handed him a notebook. "I wrote this when I was pregnant with you. I don't know if it'll help, and I know you're an adult, you probably don't want us living with you. But if things get tough later on, and you need me, call. I'll take time off and come take care of you." Julian opened the journal. Inside were pages full of a mother's hopes for her child. His mom watched him flip through it. "Yesterday, when you told us everything, I lost control. I said things I shouldn't have. I didn't mean them. I was just scared, furious. I wasn't thinking. This morning Shaw talked to me again. Your dad, he did too. I even looked some things up online." She hesitated. "Some people say this kind of thing might happen if the mother wasn't careful during pregnancy. That maybe your body is different because I didn't take good care of you." Her voice trembled. "It's not your fault, it's mine." She picked up a piece of chicken and put it in his bowl, eyes tearing up. "Again, Julian, no matter what, you're my son. You're part of me." "Mom, don't read that nonsense online," Julian said gently, touched but also a little stunned. He looked at the chicken in his bowl, then at Lucas, and finally back at his parents, his father still stern but visibly concerned. Then he turned to his mom, exhaling softly. "It's just bad luck. It has nothing to do with you." Something in that sentence broke her. Tears fell, hot and fast. "You're too kind," she choked. Yes, he was. When faced with something so unfair, some people blame others to ease their guilt. But her son had never once blamed them for how he was born. He had never said, "It's your fault I turned out this way." "Enough, enough," said Mr. Grant, gently squeezing her shoulder and handing her a tissue. "Didn't we say we wouldn't cry today? Julian won't be able to eat. Our son's a doctor. Listen to him. Stop reading nonsense online. And let's stop pointing fingers. If you're going to blame yourself, then I'm at fault too. Maybe it's my genes. That's what gave him this burden." Yes, you're right," Mrs. Grant sniffled, wiping her tears and managing a smile. "Here, eat up. I made your favorite." Julian took a deep breath. He pressed his tongue to his lower teeth, trying to push the emotions down. He looked at his parents and smiled. Okay. When it came time to leave B City, Julian's parents insisted on taking them to the train station, no matter how he tried to decline. Even after they entered the security area, Julian could still see them, waving in the distance. He turned to find Lucas already waving back. A moment later, his parents spotted them and raised their hands too, waving with effort through the layers of glass. Julian had always thought that kind of public waving goodbye was overly sentimental, but now, watching Lucas and his parents, his heart stirred with something he couldn't name. As they walked deeper into the station, Julian asked, "When did you get so chummy with my parents?" "I've always been on good terms with them," Lucas said smugly. "Last time they even tried to make me their godson. This morning, your mom had me helping in the kitchen. Said I'd better learn to cook your favorite dishes." Julian gave him a sideways look. Lucas laughed. "But your dad, man, he's intense. Found me at 5 in the morning, talked to me for over an hour. Didn't stop frowning until I swore again and again that I'd take care of you and the baby. Then he looked slightly less murderous. That sounded reasonable enough. Still, something about it rubbed Julian the wrong way. There it was. It sounded exactly like some cliché line from a soap opera, like the scumbag ex making empty promises to the heroine. Julian shot him a sharp look. Lucas blinked. Did I say something wrong? Julian didn't answer, but a moment later, Lucas plopped down next to him and held up a screenshot of his recent online purchases. Julian stared at the titles. How to Communicate Like a Pro, Never Lose an Argument, Art of Speaking, and, at the bottom, 385 cheesy lines to woo your wife. Julian's lips twitched. You think any of this'll help? Lucas asked sincerely. Julian clapped a hand on his shoulder, then reached over, tapped cancel order, and requested a refund. They returned to a city late that night, dropped by the hospital briefly, and then finally went home. After showering, Lucas went to knock on the bedroom door. To his surprise, the door, which was always shut tight, was left slightly ajar. He paused, then knocked anyway. Someone inside had clearly left the door like that on purpose as a silent signal. Don't knock, just come in. But when there was no reply, Lucas hesitated, then knocked again. Julian, he called softly. A beat later, Julian's voice came, low and grumbly. Come in. Lucas stepped in. You forgot to close the door. It's getting cold, be careful of drafts. As he shut the door and turned to sit down, he froze. The floor mattress was gone. You kicking me out? Lucas's voice brimmed with mock hurt. Julian, how could you? After everything we've been through, you're heartless. He had just survived parental interrogation, taken a smack from Mrs. Grant, and shared a long, emotional night of conversation. He thought. They were closer now, like comrades in arms, and now his spot on the floor was gone. Julian stared at him for a long moment, then said, Get up here. What? Lucas was sure his ears were malfunctioning. I said come sleep on the bed, Julian repeated, surprisingly patient. The floor's cold, and you're still bruised. Back when Julian used to banish him to the floor, Lucas had tried every excuse to sneak into bed, said the floor was too hard, his neck hurt, the mattress was bad for his back. Now that Julian was inviting him, Lucas should have been thrilled. Instead, Lucas stared at him in stunned silence. Why? He finally asked. Julian's expression darkened. I seem to remember saying I'd take care of you now. Lucas didn't respond. Are you coming or not? Maybe I should just sleep on the floor, Lucas mumbled. I run hot. And I've got bony joints. Soft beds make my back sore. Julian's expression dropped. He had offered this out of trust, because things between them had improved, because Lucas had been nothing but respectful. And Lucas was rejecting it? Fine. Whatever. Julian turned off the light with a sharp click. Lucas shuffled to the closet, pulling out a spare blanket to rebuild his floor bed. Julian could hear every rustle, and the more he heard, the more annoyed he became. Was he that scary? Lucas would rather sleep on the cold, hard floor than share a bed with him? He wanted to ask, but doing so would make it seem like he cared too much. So instead, he rolled over and angrily shut his eyes. Meanwhile, Lucas lay on his ultra-thin mattress, yanking the covers over his face. Thank God Julian had turned off the light. Because if he hadn't, Lucas really would have gotten kicked out. He didn't even know what Julian was thinking anymore. Why he'd suddenly invited him up. But all he could think was one sentence from Julian, and he had immediately gotten aroused. His scalp was numb. The first time had been drunk. Second, shirtless Julian. Third, holding Julian close. Those were, at least, somewhat understandable. But this? He wasn't drunk. He hadn't touched him. Hadn't even seen him. So what the hell was wrong with his body? Julian simply saying, come up here and sleep had lit him up like a fuse. What kind of best friend reacts like that? Was his nervous system just permanently wired for the word Julian? Julian had even laid down layers of thick bedding for him, but the mattress still felt like stone. And even worse, his body was burning up. The cold did nothing. His mind was chaos. The more he tried to calm down, the worse it got. He couldn't even imagine what would have happened if he'd actually taken that offer and crawled into bed. When this vacation ended, he told himself grimly, he was going to the hospital. Immediately, no delay, not even 1 second. On his day off, Lucas Shaw disguised himself like a celebrity avoiding paparazzi, black hat, black mask, black sunglasses, wrapped tighter than most stars going out for groceries, not because he was famous, but because the Mr. Popular of Jihua hospital simply knew too many people. He couldn't risk running into a colleague at any of the major hospitals. After all, this particular health issue was not one he could explain to a familiar face. Even with skin as thick as his, some things were beyond even him. He mentally scanned every hospital in a city before deciding to drive out to a small county hospital in the suburbs. He arrived early, cautiously, took a general urology slot, since all the specialists were booked, and shrank into a corner of the waiting room, keeping an eye on the appointment screen. Since general registrations didn't show the doctor's name, he hoped that would minimize the risk. Number 83, Lucas Shaw. After a long wait, his number was finally called. He took a deep breath, steadied his nerves, and stepped into the exam room, then breathed a huge sigh of relief. The doctor was a young man, definitely not someone he knew. Lucas took off his mask and glasses and gave the guy a polite smile. "Celebrity?" the doctor asked, noting his good looks and extreme effort to hide his face. Lucas shook his head frantically. The doctor gave him a say no more, I get it look, then asked, "What seems to be the issue?" As a doctor himself, Lucas knew exactly how to explain his symptoms, clearly and concisely, but as a patient, especially a patient with this problem, he just couldn't get the words out. "Well, I have this friend." The doctor glanced up at him. Lucas cleared his throat and rushed on. "He's straight, totally straight, but he, once had a thing with a colleague, and ever since, he's been really sensitive to physical contact with said colleague, like, super easy to, react." By now, his ears were burning, whether from embarrassment or something else, he wasn't sure. "So, what's wrong with my friend?" Lucas asked. "Can it be treated?" The doctor raised an eyebrow. "This colleague, also male?" Lucas nodded. The doctor's expression grew more complicated. "So, your friend reacts to a man, is sensitive to touch from a man, has slept with said man, and he thinks he's straight?" "It's my friend," Lucas insisted weakly. But the urologist clearly wasn't buying the sitcom plotline. He typed a few things into the computer, then said, "I've transferred your appointment to psych. It's upstairs. No extra charge. You're good to go." Lucas, deeply offended, Lucas stormed out under the doctor's calm stare. Mask on, sunglasses back in place. The doctor watched him leave, then tried hard to memorize his face, planning to report back to his die-hard fangirl girlfriend. This guy is definitely a celebrity. Might even have a boyfriend. Keep an eye out. Total scandal potential. Lucas sat in his car, sulking. That doctor was the worst. If he'd known this would happen, he wouldn't have come. He shoved the key into the ignition, fully prepared to head home. But just as he started the engine, he glanced in the rearview mirror and hesitated. A car had pulled up behind him, clearly eyeing his shady, tree-covered parking spot. "You heading out or not?" the other driver called. Lucas had arrived early and lucked into a spot under the only patch of Shade. Perfect. Hard to give up. After a moment of internal conflict, he pulled the key back out. Not leaving, he said. So what if it was psych? He was here already. Might as well see it through. It was the least he could do to make use of that excellent parking space. And his early morning suffering, he walked back into the outpatient building and climbed up to the psychiatry floor, where he was greeted by a kindly older doctor. Psych consultations were different from other departments. No rush to push patients through. Doctors took their time. If someone seemed unstable, they'd even try to have a full conversation. Don't worry, the psychiatrist said warmly. I've seen it all. Whatever's on your mind, you can talk to me. Lucas launched into the same explanation he'd given downstairs, this time with even less enthusiasm. But oddly enough, this doctor seemed to have read the same script as the last one. He leaned back slightly, studied Lucas for a long beat, then said seriously, So let me get this straight. You react to a man, are sensitive to his touch, have slept with him, and you think you're straight? Lucas gave a limp protest. It's not me. It's my friend. Is he salvageable? The psychiatrist leaned in, thoughtful. This situation is indeed rare, then gently added, Let's try thinking outside the box. Lucas perked up slightly. Okay? I mean, is it possible that this colleague you had unexpected relations with is someone you actually like? I like, Lucas echoed, stumbling on the words. His tongue slipped, biting the inside of his cheek. No way. How could I like him? The psychiatrist smiled kindly. Being gay is nothing to be ashamed of. Young man, I know, but... Lucas opened his mouth to argue, but when he looked up and met the doctor's serene, all-knowing gaze, he lost his momentum. Have you ever liked a man before? The psychiatrist asked. Lucas shook his head. What about women? Lucas thought hard. The only vague memories were from college or before, all just a blur. Can't really remember. Nothing recent. The psychiatrist nodded. Sounds like you might be bisexual. Totally. Normal. You probably just haven't come to terms with it yet. If it's still unclear in a week or two, come back. And if you feel comfortable, feel free to book with me again. I'm always on duty the same day. Lucas looked up. The doctor's eyes were calm, wise, reassuring. And yet, something in that gaze made Lucas feel completely unmoored. He wandered out of the hospital like a ghost, dazed, sat in his car for a long time, not even starting it. Everything he thought he knew about himself felt like it was shattering into dust. He liked Julian? No way. Sure, he cared about him, was possessive, had physical reactions around him. But like him? Julian was his rival of 10 years, his sworn academic nemesis, the guy he bickered and wrestled with at every turn. They had only recently started getting along. To say he liked Julian? It was absurd, like claiming Shang Yu secretly loved Liu Bang, or that Zhuge Liang and Zhou Yu were a tragic love story. Total fan fiction. Not even the tabloids would buy it. And yet, if he didn't have any feelings, why couldn't he stop thinking about what the psychiatrist had said? Like a scalpel slicing open his chest, exposing the truth he didn't want to face. In his mind, the doctor's face blurred into Julian's. And suddenly, images rushed forward like a reel of film. That first glance in the internet cafe, Julian challenging him with fiery eyes in college. Julian walking beside him under the night sky, passing the pudding shop. Julian leaning close in a dream, seductive, irresistible. Julian smiling, eating tiger skin peppers, hugging him unexpectedly in the dark. Julian saying, I want to care for you. In that moment, back then, when Lucas had blurted out that question, why did you decide to keep the baby? What had he been hoping to hear? That it had something to do with him? Why had that mattered? He didn't even know anymore. His rational mind and emotional instincts were at war. Lucas felt like his heart was being yanked in two. Did he really have pure intentions toward Julian? If he did, why was his heart racing this much? But if he didn't, how was he supposed to face him again? Julian trusted him completely, trusted him enough to talk about growing old together, and now he had thoughts he shouldn't have, fantasies, desires, things he had no right to want. Was that okay? When Julian Grant got home from work, Lucas Shaw had just finished cooking dinner. Lucas had mentioned yesterday that he'd swapped his schedule to take a personal day today. Julian assumed he'd be out late, but right before he clocked out, Lucas texted him, "Come home for dinner." Coincidentally, Julian had been craving tiger skin green peppers, so he saved room and headed back early. But when he sat at the table, he noticed that while there were plenty of dishes, the one thing missing was the tiger skin peppers. He felt a twinge of disappointment but kept a straight face and asked, casually, "No show-off green peppers today?" Ever since Julian had once praised that dish, Lucas made it often, always, with exaggerated pride, saying he'd inherited the recipe from his grandfather. Lucas hesitated. "Didn't see any good ones at the market," he said, scooping corn into Julian's bowl. "Try this instead." Julian lowered his head and looked at the bright yellow kernels in his bowl, expression unreadable. Something was off with Lucas today. He didn't want to pry, but he couldn't help wondering where Lucas had gone earlier. The thought flitted through his mind, and Julian caught himself. Since when did he care about Lucas's whereabouts? It was way too much, far beyond what should exist between two adults. With healthy boundaries, he tried to suppress the curiosity, but found he couldn't. He really wanted to know. The meal was oddly quiet. For the first time, Julian noticed how silent their apartment felt when Lucas wasn't talking. He glanced at Lucas, who was eating seriously. No jokes, no banter, just a solemn look, chewing like every bite required deep thought. His gaze was distant. Had Julian done something to upset him? First, he rejected sleeping together. Now Lucas wasn't cooking his favorite dish. In the past, Lucas always insisted they coordinate their days off. This time, he had intentionally staggered them. For half a minute, Julian actually reflected on how he'd been treating Lucas. Then he jolted at the realization. Was he seriously reflecting over Lucas Shaw? That was ridiculous. Lucas wasn't some fragile thing. What could Julian have possibly done to hurt him? If anything, he might have been a little cold, but that's just how their relationship had always been. 10+ years of it. Why would Lucas suddenly start minding now? That's his issue. Julian. Lucas's voice cut into his thoughts. Julian looked up. When was the last time you liked someone? Julian paused, a corn kernel halfway to his mouth. Was Lucas trying to have a heart-to-heart? Normally, Julian wouldn't humor a question like that. But maybe because of his earlier reflection, he decided to be a little patient today. He thought for a second and said, "Zhong Lan, how did you know you liked her?" Lucas asked. Julian blinked. It felt easy to be around her. Natural. Lucas nodded thoughtfully. You feel comfortable with Wu too, right? Do you like him? Julian looked at him like he'd lost his mind. He's married. Lucas didn't flinch. What about me? What? Do you feel comfortable with me? Julian hesitated, then gave a soft, "Yeah, I'm not married. So, do you like me?" Julian? Mid-chew, he inhaled a kernel the wrong way and burst into a fit of coughing. He grabbed a tissue and covered his mouth, coughing until his face turned red. Lucas scrambled to pat his back. Eat slower. When Julian finally recovered, his eyes were watering. He dabbed at them with a tissue, and Lucas suddenly looked away. What the hell's wrong with you? Julian stood up, exasperated. What are you trying to say? Nothing, Lucas replied quickly. eyes averted. Just joking around. You looked way too serious today. This is the first time you've seen me today, Julian said flatly. Lucas had been out when Julian woke up, left only a prepped breakfast behind. They hadn't seen each other until dinner. Are you mad at me? Julian asked directly. No, Lucas said, stacking their dishes. He knew Julian had noticed. Something was off. Just some work stuff. Julian watched him for a while, then said, If there's anything I can help with, just say so. It was a rare offer from Julian. He never made gestures like that lightly. But Lucas rejected it immediately. It's fine. Julian's expression chilled. He dropped his chopsticks and walked off to the study. He left the door slightly ajar, half listening to the sounds of dishwashing outside. Then everything went quiet. Lucas hadn't come to the study. Normally, if he weren't in a meeting, he'd do his own work there. But tonight there was no sound, no calls, no tapping keyboard. Lucas wasn't working. But he wasn't coming in either. Julian looked at the empty chair across the desk and the vase of red roses beside it, once vivid, now wilted and fading fast. Suddenly, he stood, grabbed the whole bouquet, and tossed it by the door. The moment it hit the floor, Lucas looked up from the couch, startled. What's wrong? Julian gave him a long, unreadable stare, then silently returned to the study without a word. Hey, Dr. Grant, milk tea. When Julian left the OR that afternoon, Yu Sang was handing out drinks. Julian waved him off. Can't have that these days. You've been so healthy lately. I've barely seen you drink coffee, Yu Sang noted. Julian accepted a warm cup of plain water. Yu Sang raised an eyebrow. What's the occasion? I've got good news, Yu Sang grinned. I finally got a girlfriend. Julian blinked, then smiled. That's great. Congrats. He remembered Yu Sang always being too busy to date. During team dinners, he often joked about a girl he'd liked forever but never dared. Confess to. Didn't have the money or time before, Yu Sang said. Now that I'm officially an attending, I figured it was time. I told her, and she said I'd have to win her over. I thought that meant rejection, but turns out she actually gave me a chance. He blushed, smile widening. My girlfriend says I'm too boring. No sense of romance. With a grin, he pulled a book from his shelf and handed it to Julian. So I bought this. Gonna learn how to keep a relationship alive. Julian glanced at the cover. A bright, self-help title from some relationship guru. Usually, he wouldn't even spare it a second glance. But today, for some reason, he paused. Does it help? He asked. Yu Sang, glowing with infatuation, said, Of course it does. Relationships need effort, just like anything else. Then he squinted at Julian. Wait, are you trying to win someone over? Julian returned the book. Just curious. Or is there some friend trouble? Yu Sang asked. Honestly, friendship and romance aren't that different. They both take care. Julian tapped his pen, then said suddenly, About my cousin. Yu Sang instantly caught on. Ah, that cousin of yours. I knew it. You've been kind of icy with him. If you ask me, Yu Sang went on, you gotta be more warm and welcoming. You're the host. Don't let the guest feel neglected. He said it casually, but something about it struck Julian hard. That night, Lucas ran away. He'd said some harsh words, but buried in that mess, Lucas had also joked. You know I'm a guest. You know, your Wi-Fi knows. Only I didn't know. Maybe that's what it was. Had Julian made Lucas feel like an outsider? You're not big on relationship management, Yu Sang went on. But even, you gotta admit, feelings go both ways. Julian cut him off. Send me the link. Huh? Julian nodded toward the book. Yu Sang stared at the smiling guru on the cover, stunned, speechless. Lucas had no idea what hit him. That night, he came out of the shower, towel drying his hair, about to revise a paper. when Julian, who usually worked in the study, came and sat right beside him on the couch. Before Lucas could ask, Julian handed him a mug. "You were teaching at the university today, right? Thought your throat might be dry." Lucas blinked at the steaming cup of monk fruit tea. He took it, fingers trembling slightly. By the time he'd finished half of it, Julian was still sitting there, no teasing, no sarcasm, just quietly close. The couch was wide, but they sat so close that there wasn't even space for a throw pillow between them. Lucas could hear Julian's breathing, feel his body heat. Lucas stared down at his paper, rereading the same line for over an hour. Without processing a single word, he gave up. "I think I'll go right in the study." "Why?" Julian asked. Lucas panicked. "Sofa's too soft. Makes me sleepy." Julian nodded and let him go. Lucas carried his laptop into the study, just getting settled when the door opened again. Julian walked in, computer in hand. "Sofa's too soft," he said simply. Lucas bit his cheek and gave a stiff nod. They sat across from each other, laptops creating a small wall between them. Finally, Lucas managed to focus again, but just as he resumed editing, something brushed against his ankle. Cool, soft skin. Julian's. Lucas froze. He looked up, heart racing, only to find Julian focused entirely on his screen, completely unaware. After a moment, Lucas whispered, "Why aren't you wearing socks?" Julian gave him a strange look. Lucas braced for a sarcastic retort, but instead, Julian stood, went to the bedroom, and returned with socks. Lucas stared at his bare ankles, then murmured, "Maybe pick a longer pair, one that covers more." Julian gave him a long look, then patted his shoulder. "Come with me." Lucas assumed Julian was going to throw down with him. Instead, Julian opened his drawer and said, "Pick a pair." Lucas felt like he'd stepped into an alternate universe. Julian? Offering options? He picked the longest pair and handed them over. Julian actually put them on. Sat on the bed, wearing loose loungewear, the top button undone. As he bent down, Lucas caught a glimpse of collarbone, of a red mole, just above his chest. He averted his gaze. "You missed a button." Julian looked down. Everything was buttoned. Lucas mumbled, "When you go to work, you always button all the way up." "This is loungewear," Julian replied. "And that makes it okay to stop halfway?" Julian. Enough. He'd tried. Tea. Proximity. Socks. He was done trying. He yanked off the socks, popped open the top buttons, grabbed his laptop, and slammed the door behind him. A few seconds later, the door flew back open. "If something's wrong with your brain, go get it checked." With that, he climbed back into bed and slammed the door again. Peace. Finally, Lucas stood outside, taking a deep breath. He wanted to shout, "I did go to the hospital, and now I'm ruined. Every glance, every touch, every breath from you, it drives me crazy." He wanted to storm in, rip those buttons off, and he slapped himself across the face. Get it together. What the hell is wrong with me? Julian Grant had been in a terrible mood lately, because Lucas Shaw was pulling away from him. On the surface, it wasn't obvious. They still commuted together, took time off together, sometimes ate meals together. Lucas no longer went out of his way to work in the living room. Everything seemed normal, but Julian could feel it. Something subtle had changed. Lucas still joked around like before, smiling easily, saying all the right things. But to Julian, it felt like punching a pillow. Every time he tried to address it, his words landed in soft silence, absorbed without resistance, and left unanswered. "Dr. Grant, is something bothering you?" Ren Miao asked as she walked beside him, her parents flanking them. She had just completed a round of chemotherapy and was heading home to rest. She wore a shoulder-length blonde wig. Julian guessed it was a gift from Ren Han. It suited her, making her look like a princess straight out of a fairy tale. Julian was only accompanying her part of the way, having run into them. Just as she was being discharged, he hadn't realized his emotions were so obvious. Julian hesitated. Just as he opened his mouth, he saw Lucas, returning from the inpatient building. Their eyes met, and Lucas immediately looked away, his stride faltering. For a second, it was so slight, most wouldn't have noticed. But Julian did. Avoidance wasn't like him. Lucas had always met him head-on, cracking jokes or teasing relentlessly. But now, his posture screamed retreat. Meow. Don't pry into Dr. Grant's personal life. Her father gently reminded. Ren Meow pouted. I know. It's fine, Julian said, lowering his gaze. Dr. Shaw, Ren Meow suddenly called out. She had gotten to know Lucas through Ren Han. Lucas always joked with them, never putting on airs. And she had quickly warmed up to him. These days she was visibly more cheerful. Seeing him now, she greeted him warmly. Nothing like the quiet, withdrawn girl she used to be. Meow? Lucas approached with a smile. Her parents nodded politely at him. You're being discharged? He asked. She nodded. Dr. Grant's walking me out. At the mention of Julian, something shifted subtly in Lucas's expression. From the moment Ren Meow called out to him, he had felt Julian's gaze, locked on him, intense, unrelenting. But Lucas didn't dare look back. He focused instead on Ren Meow's face, terrified of letting even a flicker of emotion show. Julian, however, said lightly, Want to walk with us? They had nearly reached the front doors of the inpatient ward. Julian, clearly, only intended to walk a little further. Lucas searched for an excuse to bail, but nothing came. So he nodded, reluctantly joining them. As expected, Julian stopped at the front gate. Happy discharge, he told Ren Meow. Dr. Grant, can I shake your hand? She asked. Of course. He extended his hand, wishing you a smooth recovery. He assumed it was just a gesture of gratitude, until he saw her eyes, shimmering with uncertainty, and then he understood. She was afraid of dying. She was looking to him, her healer, for a little. Borrowed courage. He glanced at her parents, who exchanged looks and stepped back, giving them space. Julian lowered his voice and pointed to a nearby statue on the grass. Jodo. You know who that is? The white marble sculpture depicted an elderly female doctor in a lab. Coat, hair neatly cropped, her face both stern and kind. Ren Meow shook her head. That's Dr. Lin Chaoji, Julian explained. A pioneer in obstetrics and gynecology. She saved countless lives. Many patients here pray to her. Ren Meow smiled faintly. She must be very busy. Julian turned to face the statue, palms pressed together. Please watch over Ren Meow, he said. Grant her strength and healing. Ren Meow's lashes fluttered. She hadn't expected him to pray for her. Emotion welled up inside her. She studied the lines on Dr. Lin's face. After a while, a trace of melancholy returned to her eyes. She was reminded of that old saying, do your best, leave the rest to fate. Doctors can only do so much. The rest is up to the heavens. Sensing her mood, Julian said quietly, Want to hear a secret? Ren Meow looked up, curiosity breaking through her gloom. A secret? Julian nodded. He stared at the ground for a beat before saying, I'm sick too. Soon, I'll be having a very risky surgery. He looked her in the eyes. I don't know if I'll make it. Ren Meow blinked, surprised. Julian turned back to Dr. Lin's statue. So, let's make a deal. On her birthday next year, we'll meet here and bring her flowers together. You'll be alive by then, he said. And so will I. Ren Meow's gaze softened. The despair was gone, replaced with something steadier, stronger. Okay, she reached out. Pinky promise. Julian smiled. It's a deal. He watched her rejoin her parents and wave goodbye, her steps lighter than before. He stood in quiet thought. A moment later, Lucas stepped beside him. With uncharacteristic seriousness, he bowed deeply to the statue. "Please watch over Julian too." Julian turned, surprised. "You prayed for Ren Miao," Lucas said. "Why not pray for yourself?" Julian looked away, eyes settling once more on the statue. "Because I have you. For someone usually so sharp-tongued, Julian's sudden tenderness left. Lucas momentarily speechless. His heart felt light and fuzzy, like cotton, swelling in his chest. "I don't know what's going on with you lately," Julian murmured. "But I wish we could go back to how things were." Lucas took a long breath and tugged at his collar. He wasn't sure they could go back. He had tried so hard to stuff those feelings away. But once something blooms, once it pushes through the soil and sees the sun, how do you bury it again? Unless he ignored it, avoided it, pretended it didn't exist. As he struggled with the thought, Julian turned and said softly, "I want tiger skin peppers tonight." Lucas blinked. Julian had never made such a request before. It had always been Lucas, inviting him over for dinner, and now, for the first time, Julian was the one asking. Lucas froze. It was just a dish. He knew how to make it, but ever since his grandfather told him, "Cook this for the one you'll spend your life with," the words tiger skin peppers had taken on a new weight. Every time he heard them now, that meaning rushed back. He looked away, unable to meet Julian's eyes. "Is that okay?" Julian pressed. Lucas swallowed hard. "Maybe another night. I have plans." Lucas. The name caught him off guard. Except Julian hadn't called him Lucas. He had called him brother. Lucas's brain short-circuited. Brother? Julian was half a year older than him. Technically speaking, he was the older one. Yet Julian had looked him straight in the eyes and called him that. Lucas swore he saw 1,000 fireworks explode inside his skull. His heart jumped into his throat. His blood felt like it was on fire. He couldn't think, couldn't breathe. The nickname itself wasn't unusual. Sales reps, juniors, even patients sometimes called him that. But coming from Julian? Lucas stood there, dazed. Maybe it was because of that night, when he half-jokingly told Julian he wished he had a big brother. Maybe it was because Julian had never used that term before. And now, even though he was older, he'd said it with no sarcasm, no mockery, just softly. Or maybe it was just because it was Julian. Lucas's heart felt like it might burst from his chest. Julian looked at him, unreadable. Then it settled. "If you don't cook tonight, don't bother coming home." Lucas stammered. I'll make it. I'll definitely make it." In that moment, you could have asked him to run around the world twice, and he'd say yes. Julian gave him a cryptic glance, hands in his pockets, and turned to walk back toward the inpatient wing. He had finally found something that worked. After failing to break through Lucas's recent coldness, Julian had gone back to that relationship advice book. He reread it twice nearly, memorized it. He still didn't love that Lucas made him guess and tiptoe around. If something was wrong, he'd rather Lucas just say it. Julian didn't lack friends or colleagues. If it were anyone else, he'd have distanced himself already. He had too much on his plate to play these games. But this was Lucas, and Julian didn't want to let go. He gave himself one more week. If Lucas was still distant after that, he'd drop it. No more second chances. By the time Lucas shook off the aftershocks of that one word, brother, Julian was already gone. He stood there stunned, only to be interrupted by a voice beside him. "Senior, what are you doing here?" It was Zhonglan. Lucas turned to her, scrambling for an excuse. "Soaking in some sun," she teased. "Sunbathing on hospital hours? Should I report you?" She walked over to Dr. Lin's statue, the sunlight casting a halo around her. Tidy bun and smiling face. Lucas stared for a moment, then blurted out, "Are you free after work? Today?" "Huh?" Zhonglan blinked. He nodded. "Want to grab dinner?" The restaurant was tastefully minimalist in decor. Lucas Shaw handed the menu to Zhonglan and said, "Order anything you like." "My treat." Zhonglan chuckled. "Wow, big spender. You either want something from me or you're trying to chase me again." Lucas gave a soft a bit of both. Zhonglan raised an eyebrow, then called the waiter over and pointed to the most expensive dishes on the menu. Resting her chin in her hands, she teased, "Don't mind if I do." "Be my guest," Lucas replied, smiling as he raised a hand in invitation. They chatted idly about hospital gossip, and halfway through the meal, Zhonglan finally noticed something. "Why aren't you eating, senior?" Lucas hesitated, chopsticks untouched. He thought about Julian waiting at home for dinner. "I'm not hungry," he mumbled. Zhonglan gave him a long, meaningful look. "Wow, must be serious. You're so anxious you've lost your appetite." She picked up the pace with her meal. When she was nearly done, she sipped some soup, wiped her lips with a napkin, and looked Lucas squarely in the eye. "All right, spill it. If it's something I can help with, I'll give it my all." Lucas hesitated, then said, "It's about feelings. Might touch on some of your personal experience. If you're uncomfortable, feel free to say no." Zhonglan sat up straight. "You're asking me relationship advice?" She laughed. "We might not exactly swing the same way, you know. But sure, what's going on? You got someone on your mind?" "There's this guy." Lucas trailed off, hesitant. "I think I like him." Zhonglan's eyes widened, silently encouraging him to continue. "I want to figure out if it's real," Lucas said, voice low. "How do you know? When it's not just curiosity, or thrill-seeking, or possessiveness disguised as friendship?" He took a deep breath. "How do you know it's not confusion, just plain, sincere love?" Most of Lucas's friends were straight. He'd never had someone he could talk to about this without risking a mess. Zhonglan, however, was the rare exception. Not just because she liked women, but because she got it. She was glad Lucas had asked after dinner, or she might have choked on her soup from pure shock. She took a moment to mentally organize everything he'd said, sipped her tea, and then asked as gently and bluntly as she could, "Do you want to kiss him? Hug him?" Lucas echoed her words softly. Kiss him? Hug him? He hadn't. Not even in his wildest, most disorienting dreams had he ever kissed Julian. Did he want to? He wasn't sure. Never thought about it before. Now, he didn't dare answer. Zhonglan studied his reaction, then prompted gently, "Do you feel happy just thinking about him? Like seeing him smile makes your whole day? You care deeply about how he feels. You want to make him laugh, share everything with him. You imagine growing old together. You want to protect him forever. You want him to have peace, to be happy. You put him before yourself, and you think everything about him is just wonderful." She paused. "And do you want to sleep next to him? Do everything only lovers do?" Lucas looked down at his phone, his lashes low. He didn't deny a single thing. "Holy," Zhonglan blurted, before slapping a hand over her mouth. "Sorry, just wow." She'd known Lucas for years, ever since their mentor introduced them. He'd been her lab partner, her senior, and eventually a trusted friend. Though she had her own orientation, she'd never once imagined she'd live to see Lucas come out. Her mind spun. Finally, she asked, "Does Julian know?" The last time she'd heard anything, Julian had been trying to court a girl, only to realize she was into women. Now it turned out that his academic rival was gay. If Julian found out, he might just shut down entirely. Lucas looked panicked for a second, worried she might have guessed too much. "I don't think so." "Good." Zhonglan patted her chest, visibly relieved. Then her eyes narrowed. "Why are you so nervous?" Lucas tensed even more. He hadn't been that nervous when he confessed to her, but at the mere mention of Julian's name, he was wound tighter than a spring. He began, but just then, his phone rang. "Sorry," he said quickly, seizing the moment. He breathed a sigh of relief. When he saw the caller ID, only to tense again. It was Julian. The relief didn't last long. "You're not home?" Julian asked. Lucas's hand trembled slightly. He had sent Julian a text earlier, saying he'd head home early to cook tiger skin peppers. He knew Julian usually worked late, around 8:30 p.m., so he'd thought he had time for dinner with Zhonglan. But now, it was only 7 p.m., and Julian was already home. "I went out to buy groceries," Lucas said, wiping sweat from his brow. "You left at 6, Julian replied coldly. "I couldn't find good peppers nearby," Lucas lied. "So I took a longer route." Silence. Then Julian said, "I'm at the market downstairs from our building. 3 yuan a pound. Plenty of peppers." Click. The call ended. Lucas scrambled to call him back 3 times, all rejected. When he finally looked up, he saw Zhonglan staring at him, stunned. She pointed at his phone. "Is that the guy?" She hadn't heard the other side of the call, but based on Lucas's lies, his panic, and how well the caller seemed to know his schedule, "He lives with you? He's even tracking you?" Lucas didn't get a chance to respond. The woman sitting at the next table, elegantly dressed, high ponytail, bright red lips, suddenly stood and stomped over in high heels. "You're seriously sitting here having dinner while he's home waiting for you to eat together?" Lucas blinked. "Who?" She didn't wait. With the intensity of a machine gun, she let loose. "You were all fired up chasing my girlfriend before, weren't you? And now what? You're too shy to admit your feelings? If you didn't like him, you wouldn't be sitting here trying to talk it out with Lanlin. My girl's too polite. But me? I'll say it straight. You're into him. You like him. If you're a man, don't run from it. Own it. Cook the damn peppers. Chase the damn man. Stop wasting time. And don't give me that maybe I'm confused crap. Here's your test. Ask yourself, do you want to date him? To be exclusive? To be his and for him to be yours? No one else allowed in? Because real love, no matter how selfless it looks, always comes with the desire to have someone. Zhonglan tugged her arm, muttering apologetically, "Sorry, Lucas. My girlfriend got jealous. Thought you were trying to win me back. She insisted on coming to watch." Lucas didn't respond. He stared at Lin Qian, Zhonglan's firecracker girlfriend, stunned. Every word she said felt like a brick to the head. Something inside him cracked, collapsed, cleared. The dust settled, and all that was left was one sentence, a soft, stunned murmur. "I want to." Lucas Shaw suddenly stood up from his seat and said to the 2 women, "Across the table, you go ahead and eat. I'll cover the bill. I'm heading home." He drove like a man on a mission. On his way back, he passed the market, near their apartment complex, and saw a pile of fresh green peppers. He winced, annoyed, and bought a huge bag before rushing upstairs. As soon as he opened the door, he saw Julian Grant sitting stiffly in the living room. Julian looked up when Lucas entered, but immediately shifted his gaze back to the laptop, forcing down the words, "Where the hell were you?" He knew Lucas hadn't been grocery shopping. His instincts told him not to ask, told him it wasn't appropriate to interrogate. And even if he did ask, Lucas would just lie again. Unexpectedly, Lucas spoke first. "I'm sorry. I didn't expect you to get back so early." He paused, then said, "I shouldn't have lied. I had dinner with Zhonglan tonight. When you called, I was with her." Julian's expression tightened. He didn't expect Lucas to come clean, not when they hadn't exactly defined any need for such transparency. The honesty dulled some of the sting, but the content of the confession made his heart sink. Why was he having dinner with Zhonglan? Why did he go out when they'd planned to eat together? As if he could read Julian's mind, Lucas added quickly, "But I didn't eat. I wasn't trying to hit on her. I just had some things I wanted to ask." Give Me a few minutes and I'll cook. Dinner will be ready in half an hour. Julian glanced up, surprised. Lucas had already taken the peppers into the kitchen. Before Lucas came home, Julian had thought to himself, if Lucas dared to lie again, he'd throw him and his suitcase out the door on the spot. But now that Lucas was being honest, he couldn't even bring himself to get angry. At dinner, a steaming plate of tiger skin green peppers sat front and center. Lucas kept piling them into Julian's bowl. Do you like it? Next time, just tell me what you're craving. I'll make whatever you want. Julian looked down at the mountain of green peppers in his bowl, tempted to say, I'm not a tobacco hornworm. I like peppers, sure, but this is a bit much. Lucas, oblivious to the internal complaint, kept talking. I've been a little lost lately, you probably noticed. But I won't be like that anymore, Julian. I promise. Julian looked up suddenly, surprised. Lucas really meant it? Was it the warning he'd sent through telepathy earlier that finally worked? Julian marveled at the strange power of psychic intervention, then realized he might not need to keep his emotional distance after all. The thought made him feel unexpectedly light. He even ate more than usual. After dinner, he paused and said, Come with me tomorrow. I'm scheduled for the 4-dimensional ultrasound. The baby had been inside him for over 5 months now. This checkup was a major one, designed to rule out serious abnormalities. It showed the baby's organs and facial features in clearer detail than any scan before. Julian was anxious. Maybe it was hormones. Maybe it was something else. But ever since he first felt the baby kick, he had been obsessing over its health because his situation was so unusual. He had ultrasounds more frequently than most. All results had been normal so far. Still, Julian couldn't stop thinking about all the mistakes he'd made early in the pregnancy. Until now, all he'd had were grainy black and white images. But this scan would show everything. If anything was wrong, he'd have to terminate the pregnancy. Julian had never feared anything. He had always handled his problems alone. But this time, he didn't want to be alone. Lucas, meanwhile, was shocked by how easily Julian forgave him. He had mentally prepared for a full-blown fight. But instead, Julian not only let it go, he invited him to come along to his prenatal checkup. It felt like a skittish cat suddenly curling up in his lap. Lucas felt like his brain was floating and his heart was glazed in warm honey. After basking in the sweetness for a while, Lucas suddenly frowned. Why, hasn't Tongki been calling me about this? Julian. That's because it wasn't Tongki who reminded him this time. He had remembered the schedule himself, but he didn't say that. Instead, he glanced over and replied coolly, Because he thinks I'm more reliable. You are the most reliable. Lucas grinned. Anyway, before the appointment, I'll bring a flash drive so we can record the footage. I want to study who she takes after. Julian was just about to retort when Lucas added, Hopefully she takes after you. Then she'll be a beautiful little girl. Julian swallowed his comeback. His mood turned complicated. Was Lucas taking some kind of happy pill these days? He was being suspiciously agreeable and not picking fights for once. Lucas propped his chin in his hand and gazed at Julian. At this point, Julian's face was probably his favorite view in the world. He really meant it. He hoped the baby would look like Julian. These days, Julian let him feel the baby more often. He could listen to her heartbeat. Every time he did, she would kick him like clockwork. Such a daddy's girl. Lucas sat beside him, staring at Julian's belly. The latter calmly sipped his soup, not hiding or retreating. 5 months in, the bump was more obvious now. Thankfully, it was almost winter. With loose hoodies and layers of clothing, it was still easy to hide. But in the OR, things were different. The surgical scrubs were thin. Occasionally, the fabric would stretch tight over the curve of his belly. Julian always asked the nurse to quickly help him into the sterile outer layer. But when they were slow, people started noticing. You asked me today if I've grown a beer belly, Julian said, annoyed. Then he offered me a gym membership. He didn't suggest fatty liver or Cushing's syndrome. Lucas quipped, "That's not thorough case analysis. You should critique him." Julian shot him a glare. Lucas quickly sobered. "On a serious note, how much longer are you planning to work?" "Hard to say," Julian replied. "Leave requests." "I'll take care of the paperwork," Lucas interrupted. "If you feel tired, just tell me. I'll handle it." Tankei had suggested something similar before, but Julian hadn't taken it seriously. Hearing Lucas say it again, he deadpanned. "Is your dad the hospital director?" "Nope. But I'll get the leave anyway," Lucas boasted. "Though if I do pull it off, you'll owe me one." Julian rolled his eyes but didn't argue. "So how long do you plan to keep working?" "Maybe another month or two," Julian said casually. He didn't expect Lucas to actually get the leave approved. Lately, he'd been feeling more tired, the weight of the baby, and amniotic fluid was wearing him down. He'd already cut back on overtime. For now, he could still pretend it was just a beer belly. But in the third trimester, Director Monroe might start asking questions. "Isn't that too much?" Lucas asked. "I'll manage," Julian muttered. There are too many patients, but in truth, Julian was just hoping for a miracle that Lucas might secure. 2 months off, one before birth, one after. That would already be a huge win. "You're a patient too, you know," Lucas said. Julian shot him a look, clearly a warning. Lucas knew better than to challenge his pride. He backed off. "All right," he said, raising both hands. "It's up to you." He tapped Julian's shoulder and added, "Get ready for the longest vacation of your life." Then he got up to clear the table. A few minutes later, he called out, "Oh, I brought you 2 bottles of anti-stretch mark cream. Left them on your nightstand. Use it after your shower." Julian looked conflicted. To avoid stretch marks, the 2 most important things were maintaining weight and applying preventive creams. He exercised regularly and ate modestly, so both he and the baby were on the smaller side. But rubbing cream on his belly, that was awkward. The last time anything had been applied to his skin, it was baby powder. Dusted on him as an infant. After his shower, he lingered in the study for a while. Eventually, he wandered into the bedroom, picked up the bottles, and studied the labels. Like they were alien artifacts. He prescribed this stuff to patients all the time. So why did it feel so weird using it on himself? He unbuttoned the bottom of his loungewear and stared at the curve of his belly. A knock on the door broke the moment. He jumped, tossed the bottle aside, and yanked the blanket over himself. Then he cleared his throat. "Come in." Lucas entered, yawning. "Why are you tucked in like a burrito? Isn't it hot?" He picked up the cream and grinned. "So, did you use it?" "I don't want to," Julian said. Lucas sat beside him. "If you end up with stretch marks, you'll regret it." "I won't." Lucas tugged at the blanket. "Want me to help?" Julian paused, then looked toward the ceiling like a martyr awaiting execution. Lucas warmed the cream in his hands before gently spreading it over Julian's belly. "You don't have to act like I'm chopping you open," he teased. "Shut up." At that moment, the baby gave a solid kick from the inside. Julian's abdominal wall was thin. Every kick felt clear under the skin, subtle from a distance but unmistakable to the touch. Lucas laughed. "She really is in sync with you." Julian sighed. "She doesn't know what stranger danger is." At this stage, fetal hearing was developed. Most babies could distinguish voices, knowing who their mother was by sound. Many patients even said their babies would stop moving when touched by someone who wasn't mom. But Julian's baby? She went wild every time Lucas talked to her. Total daddy's girl. "She trusts me," Lucas said proudly. Then added, "Should I apply some lower down too? Stretch marks often appear on the thighs and hips after all." Julian smacked his hand away. "Go to sleep." Lucas grinned and crawled back to his floor mattress, hiding a relieved breath. Thank God Julian hadn't said yes. If he'd touched any lower, he might have had to pull another emergency pop-up. In the dark, the soft scent of centella and rosehip oil floated through the room. Lucas's fingertips still tingled with warmth. He heard Julian rustling under the covers. He knew Julian was applying the rest of the cream himself. Quietly, Lucas raised his fingers to his lips and kissed them, then lowered his lashes. In the silence, his heart thundered. He turned to look at the figure in the bed. If I told you I like you, would you believe me? I don't just like you, he thought silently. I want to pursue you. Be with you. Would you be mad? He closed his eyes, then whispered in his heart. Even if you are, I can't stop loving you now. Inside the ultrasound room, Julian Grant's eyes were locked on the screen. A four-dimensional ultrasound combined 3D imaging with real-time movement. For the first time, the three of them could clearly see the baby inside Julian's womb. Their little girl had her eyes closed, a tiny upturned nose, and slightly parted lips, as if she were daydreaming. Julian's heart pounded the whole time, terrified that Tang-Ke might suddenly frown or point out an abnormal reading. Then, as if sensing his tension, Lucas Shaw gently touched Julian's hand, which hung off the edge of the exam bed. Julian turned his head and glanced at him, only to realize Lucas was just as nervous, swallowing hard. She's doing great, Tang-Ke finally exhaled, handing over the disc and relaxing into a relieved smile. I still don't understand why you changed your mind about keeping the baby, but she's healthy. That day, Julian had suddenly messaged him saying he wanted to move back home. The next morning, Lucas came by and moved all of Julian's stuff out of Tang-Ke's place. Not long after, Julian told him they'd decided to keep the baby. Tang-Ke had reread that message a dozen times, even called several times to make sure Julian hadn't been hacked, before finally accepting the truth. He glanced at the two men, both reflexively turning to each other the moment they heard the baby was healthy. Tang-Ke shifted his gaze from Julian's face to Lucas's, then back again, and realized the two were still staring at each other, completely oblivious to his presence. Tang-Ke. Ahem. He tried to break the moment. Want to grab a meal to celebrate? Julian turned away, wiping sweat from his palms, and handed the disc to Lucas. The latter smiled, clearly prepared. I made a reservation at Xianju. Shall we? Julian nodded and turned to Tang-Ke. We'll head out now. Tang-Ke? He bit his tongue just in time to stop himself from blurting out, You're not taking me with you? Just as he stood up, Lucas stuffed a thick red envelope into his pocket. You... Tang-Ke froze, waving his hand. We're a private hospital. I can't accept bribes. It's not for Dr. Tang, Lucas said. It's for Tang-Ke. Thank you for encouraging Julian to talk to me from the start, and for always keeping an eye on his health. Tang-Ke stared blankly at the surprisingly hefty envelope. Watching the two men walk away side by side, he suddenly felt like life had become a surreal soap opera. He couldn't help thinking, Julian's decision to keep the baby and the sudden thaw in his relationship with Lucas were definitely connected. But Lucas's last remark was just too suspicious. Tang-Ke didn't want to admit it, but there was definitely a marking territory vibe in that line. Seriously? He cared about Julian's health because they were old friends. He didn't need Lucas Shaw's thanks. Fuming, Dr. Tang drove straight to the fanciest restaurant in a city, slapped down Lucas's envelope, ordered a massive feast and growled, Fine, I'll eat it all myself. Meanwhile, at last, Julian and Lucas were sitting down to a peaceful meal at Shanju. The white marble table reflected soft light. The soothing notes of guqin music blended with the sound of trickling water. The faint scent of jasmine lingered on their tongues. Maybe it was the atmosphere. Maybe it was the relief of knowing the baby was healthy. But Julian found himself gazing at Lucas, quietly, dreamily. His look was so gentle it startled Lucas out of his relaxed daze. When their eyes met, Lucas's gaze drifted to Julian's slightly damp lips. He suddenly recalled what Zhonglan's girlfriend had said. "Kiss him. Hug him, Julian," he said softly. Julian kept staring at him, unusually mellow. He looked almost lazy, as if he had no defenses left. In this moment, Julian looked nothing like the sharp, commanding doctor, who once barked orders across the OR or threw punches without warning. Right now, he seemed soft, almost fragile, the kind of softness that made you want to pull him into your arms and press a kiss to his damp lips. Lucas's heart skipped. He quickly turned away, trying to push the thought down. But Julian caught the shift in his expression. "What?" he asked. Lucas scrambled to come up with an excuse. After a second's pause, he pulled out the ultrasound disc from his bag, placed it between them, and added a third teacup. "Shouldn't we toast to our daughter?" Sure enough, Julian's focus shifted back to the baby. He nodded and raised his cup, clinking it lightly with the cup for their unborn child. The crisp sound of porcelain meeting porcelain filled the room with warmth. Lucas silently thanked their daughter for the save and breathed a sigh of relief, only for Julian to drop a bomb right after. "You don't have to sleep on the floor anymore." "Huh?" Julian gave him a look full of layered meaning. They were a family now. The baby would arrive in 4 months. It didn't feel right to have the child's father still sleeping on the floor. Not only did it seem bad for family harmony, but with the weather getting colder, Julian was genuinely worried Lucas might catch a cold. Last time Lucas had refused the bed, Julian figured it was because of his tone. Maybe he hadn't asked nicely enough. So this time, he tried a gentler approach. "I still think, brother." Lucas fell silent. Julian had pulled out the ultimate weapon. He'd only tried the brother line once before, after seeing it in Yu Sang's relationship advice book. Lucas's reaction then had been extreme, like he short-circuited completely. Obviously, he loved being called that. Julian had filed that reaction away in his mind as a trump card, just in case he hadn't expected to need it again. Lucas had been acting normal for days, but now, over something as simple as sharing a bed, Lucas was suddenly playing coy again, like a bashful Victorian lady. Julian watched Lucas freeze as expected, very satisfying. "I'm planning to put the baby's crib where the floor mattress is," Julian continued. "Might as well clear the space now." Lucas tried to object. "Brother," Julian said again. He calmly added, "Lucas, Luke, sweet big brother." Each word landed like a blow. Julian wasn't being cutesy or flirty. His tone was calm, casual even, but somehow that made it worse. Lucas's brain scrambled. Every well-rehearsed plan he'd made, all the advice columns, dating guides, step-by-step strategies, went up in flames. He had sworn to take things slow, respectful, no pressure, no rushing, and definitely no letting Julian know how badly he wanted him. But now, 2 parts of his brain were locked in battle. One shouted, "If you sleep in the same bed, he'll figure you out. You're doomed." The other sang, "But he called you brother." One side reminded him what happened last time they shared a bed. The other just kept echoing, "He called you brother. He called you brother." In the end, logic lost. Lucas downed his entire cup of tea in one gulp, set it down with a bang, and said, "All right, I'm sleeping on the bed tonight." Julian smirked, satisfied. Finally, a little cooperation.
If this chapter moved you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Nova Media. Thanks for listening.